A Consultation by Diego Teran. I wish it was a nightmare. First, there is the dark all around. Then I can hear the rats closing in, slowly. What do they want? The same as everyone. Food. They used to go out for the scraps on the floor, to scout the furniture. Not anymore. Now they go for whatever little we have. Every little bite they take is something we won't have. Every single bite in our supplies hurt, as if they were biting into our hearts. And the rats are the gentle ones. Outside there are people with guns and knives, and a history of violence. They bang on our doors. They want to enter. They yell again and again about what they will do to us. But Dad has a shotgun, and my brother has a pistol, and that guy who came to live with us has a hatchet. Mom has a machete. They stood guard all night. I don't know what they do, but it works. Mostly. The others can't come in, but I always fear that one day they will. I wish it was a nightmare and not my most vivid memory. That's what you get when you live a year of your childhood in a basement, in a besieged city, while rebels fight the army. Maybe with good reason. That's how I grew up. Afraid of mundane things that lurk in the dark and steal your food. Knowing real-life monsters and knowing the people who fight them. My family tried to protect me as much as they could, but you can only protect a kid so much in a war zone. Even that guy who didn't know us from anything, Mark, protected me with all his heart. One time Mom was sick, and Dad had to go to the city to scavenge whatever he could get. A usual thing, but mostly it was Mark doing that, since it was more dangerous. I don't recall why that one time it was different, but I do remember how Mark left me with my mom in the basement, and how I listened to him fighting for an hour against a group of people who wanted to come and rob us. Or worse. I know he bled for me, and the fact that he would sometimes bring toys from his adventures in the city, so he could see me smile and give me some sense of normalcy, did help. A lot. But I came out from the experience scarred, just to a lesser degree than everyone else. I slept with my lights on until I was 18, 19 years old. But as it happens with everything, war ended and life went on. Now, more than 20 years later, with all memories as fresh as the day after things happened, remembering still the sound of guns and artillery and bombs, and night raids and threats, I had a call. I have this friend, Uma. She works as a CSI. Contrary to what popular culture may lead you to believe, she doesn't carry a gun, can't fight a pigeon to save her life, and mostly just examines stuff for something that shouldn't be there. Uma called me last week. "I need you, girl," she said. "It's something about work. I have to bring someone in as a consultant, and it has to be you." Me? A piano teacher in her early 30s? That left me cold. I couldn't even say the one word I wanted to say. Why? But I didn't have to say it either. "I know this sounds weird, but it has to be you. It's about the war." The war. Tactless as usual coming from Uma, sure, but a welcome lack of tact. People treat me like I was made of glass because I lived in a basement during the siege. "What about the war?" I asked. "All those skills you developed?" she said. "What skills? I was just a little girl too afraid to look out the window. I wasn't even allowed outside for 5 minutes." "Yes, keep saying that," she said. "But we both know you learned a lot about survival. Or am I wrong?" She wasn't. As much as I hated the rats, Mom taught me how to hunt, clean, and cook them. As she taught me many other things. It's for a good cause, Irma said. You can help someone, even if it is just me. I agreed to help her. I went to the capital the next day. Now, I was living in a town of 5,000 people, at the border where I moved 10 years ago, just because I had been living in a small place ever since the ceasefire came. Going back to the capital was a little more than a pain in the butt, but it had its silver lining. To see it was a capital city, shining pristine here and there, and full of lost, broken people, and trash a few blocks away. No more a ruin. It should have been obvious, but I'm a see-to-believe kind of woman. I had an interview where I was asked a few questions. They gave me a name tag with the word consultant on it, and Uma drove me to that damn place. A detective came with us. It was a house. Nothing on the outside seemed special. An average place in an average neighborhood. Inside the same. Don't touch anything, Uma said as she walked me towards the basement. Not here and not below. I just need you to see. And I saw. I saw traps for rats. I saw cots to sleep. I saw a makeshift oven. I saw dirt and ruin and living memory of the days of the war. I didn't see a radio, and that was the first thing that called my attention. Funny, I said. How did these people live without getting any news? Uma stared at the detective. Tell me what else you see, Uma said. What am I doing here? I asked. Just humor me, she said. And I did. There were tools, makeshift tools, but no weapons. No machete, no hammer. Nothing that could be used to defend yourself, except for 2 knives, 2 tiny knives. I smiled when I saw the toys. So many toys. I wish I had had that many. No, not during the war, but before it. All of them had marks here and there. Yes, all of them were rescued from who knows where. I took a closer look. A shiver went down my spine. I recognized one of the toys, an action figure from a movie. A movie Hollywood made less than 5 years ago. I looked at Uma. She was expressionless. The detective avoided my eyes. How many people lived here during the war? I asked. 6, we believe, Uma said. The rat traps had been used recently. Nothing was as if the place had been abandoned for decades. It was too obvious. Speak, I said, without looking at them, and with my eyes fixed in the toys. You speak, the detective said. What do you see? Same as you. A war shelter? Recently in use. Uma nodded. Do you confirm it then? She said. It is a war shelter. Please just answer yes or no, the detective said. Yes. Do you think this has been left from the war up to this day? Uma asked. I took another look at the toys. It seemed to be the case. I do, I answered. Sorry for putting you through this, Uma said. I believe we can go now. What is this? I said as we walked towards the stairs. We have a monster, the detective said as he walked behind me. Have you ever heard of the monster of Amstetten? Yes, I did. Josef Fritzl, who had his daughter trapped in a cell in his basement for almost a quarter of a century, where he raped her repeatedly, where she gave birth to 7 children. We have our own local monster, Uma said. It's just that the daughter wasn't even aware that the war is over and has been for more than 20 years. I didn't say a word. I just walked to the car. Suddenly the rats in the dark didn't look so bad. Suddenly Dad and Mom and my brother and Mark were bigger than Superman in my eyes. So quoth this raven.
For as long as I can remember, the only newspaper I've ever been excited about is the Sunday paper. It has everything. Coupons, births, deaths, that one's not so fun, comics, etc. The Record has a delivery option where you can only pay for and receive the paper on Sundays, so, naturally, I took advantage. The coupons this week are kinda shitty, to be honest. My husband Charles and I always spend Sundays together. Each week, it started the same way. He on his phone looking at most likely the very same news that I held in the paper I read. It wasn't old school like I was. I love being able to actually hold things in my hands. Books, newspapers, DVDs, and the like. Everything is online these days. It terrifies me to think that, most likely, when our two girls are grown, books won't even be common anymore. A relic of the past like the Atari or videocassettes. It's even more unsettling to know that, most likely, people won't even care. This particular Sunday starts like any other. I've just bought myself a red dress with yellow sunflowers, and I'm taking the opportunity to show it off to Charles. He donned his black dicky pants that seemed to withstand the test of time. He's had them since before I've known him. I've given up on straightening my hair after almost burning it off last month. Its tight curls hung over my shoulders. I have a paper routine that I follow methodically. First, I go to the coupons, then the comics, then the birth announcements, then the deaths to make sure that there's no one I know. And I save the articles for last. The comics are okay this week. Garfield is still being a grump, and Dilbert's still being Dilbert. Dave Grunland depicts a cartoon Smokey the Bear laying on his back with a bullet hole in his chest. A family of tourists is shown behind him, the father holding a smoking gun in the air. The quote bubble read, "Oops, from a distance, he looked threatening." Okay, a little political for a comics section, aren't we? They can't all be winners, I guess. A sigh escapes my lips as I hand that section to Charles.
Sheesh. Kinda rough on Smokey this week, weren't they?
Only one birth this week. A baby boy named William. There's no pictures. Bummer. I always love it when birth announcements are boys. Every birth is a beautiful miracle, but we don't have a boy of our own, so it's nice to read about. Only one birth this week, I tell my husband absentmindedly.
Oh? Is it a boy? I swear last month's been nothing but girls.
It is, I reply. His eyes twinkle from the wide smile I'm so deeply in love with. There are 3 deaths in the obituary section. One stands alone. The other 2 are posted separately but linked together. A caption underneath says, "Continued on 4A." I've never seen that before. Well, I was on my way to the articles anyway, so I feed into my morbid curiosity. 4A. An elderly sleeping couple is pictured in 2 separate hospital beds. The beds are close enough together that the couple can hold hands. The headline reads, "Elderly couple passes away 57 minutes apart, holding hands on their deathbeds." Aw, Charlie, this is so sad, but sweet at the same time. Here, look. I toss him the paper, already folded, open to 4A. His reading face softens as he finishes reading the article. He smiles at me.
Damn, Maggie. That is sad. I hope that's how we go when it's our time.
I'm sorry, babe, but that's not gonna happen. You're practically an old man as it is. I blow him a kiss and a wink. Charles' face drops.
Maggie, did you look at this picture?
I nod. Yeah, what about it? His eyes widen with over-exaggerated disbelief.
Look at the blanket. We have the same one. It's creepy, huh?
I take the paper out of his hand to look for myself. Sure enough, a large yellow blanket with gray circles lay over both their beds. I look over to our couch for confirmation, even though none is needed. It is the same one. My eyes begin to focus on other details in the picture. The elderly man wore a white button-up short-sleeved shirt. His black pants were visible from the bottom of the blanket. My eyes drift to the woman now. My heart feels like it literally drops to my stomach but freezes just before it hits the bottom. The elderly woman was wearing a very worn, faded, from what once must have been a vibrant red dress with yellow sunflowers. Two hellishly creepy coincidences for sure, but not impossible. A bad omen at the very most. I revert my gaze to the small printed text of the article. Tears stab my eyes like needles, and a scream bellows through my lungs. The names of the elderly couple are Charles and Margaret Welch.
I know I liked Christmas. Once upon a time, when my eyes were still wide with wonder for the magic of the world. When I'd practically leap out of bed on Christmas morning, shouting for my parents to wake up as I ran down the stairs to the mountain, presents glowing beneath the light of the decorated tree. I know I felt excitement, elation even, when my tiny hands tore the paper to expose whatever trinket or gadget I had wished for. A present just for me, something I had written to Santa Claus to specifically ask for in exchange for empty promises of good behavior. It all felt so wondrous back then. It feels like ages ago. When you grow up, you realize some very disappointing truths about Christmas. Your parents bought those presents for you, not Santa Claus. And half the time they had to scrimp and save just to get them. That Christmas isn't the season of giving, as many people claim, but rather a time of the year when everyone becomes so consumed by what they want to buy and what their family needs that others are no longer in the equation. When stampedes for the cheapest flat-screen TV on Black Friday claimed the lives of single mothers who saw their only opportunity to buy their child the toy they couldn't possibly afford otherwise. When people get stabbed while brawling in line outside of a department store door on Thanksgiving night because they wanted to get that limited discount on a select washer and dryer set. Christmas is the season of commercialism, plain and simple. And working in retail as I have, well, you see the worst of the worst during this season. I'm tired of it. I want to change things. I want people to open their eyes to just how ugly this holiday has become. And I know right where to start. My neighbors were the epitome of privileged. They may not have had a multi-million-dollar mansion, but they did everything they could to show just how much better they thought they were than the rest of the neighborhood. They had a boat, which I'm sure I haven't seen moved from their driveway more than twice since they bought it, leaving it on display on a trailer and regularly polished despite never seeing a drop of water. New cars, professionally landscaped yards kept by an outside company, of course, a housekeeper who visited daily, designer clothing, and only name brand items. James was some pencil pusher for a large company, and it showed by the professionally tailored suits he wore. Every conversation he had would end with him making some condescending remark about how something of yours could use an upgrade just like theirs had. Tiffany was practically a Stepford wife. Always done up in heels and dresses. I couldn't have a conversation with her without her boasting about what new jewelry James bought her, or the newest household item they got. I doubt she's ever worked a day in her life. Jenny, their daughter, was a prima donna to the highest degree. I still remember her throwing some hissy fit on the driveway on her 16th birthday because the brand new Lexus she got was the wrong color. See, it was red. But Jenny wanted blue to go with her eyes. Sure enough, there was a blue Lexus on the driveway the next day. I generally avoided them when I could. Aside from the fact that I didn't have anything in common with them, they were just generally unpleasant people. They were perfect. I waited until Christmas Eve. It seemed fitting, and I knew the parents would be drinking as they did every year. The fact that they left their curtains open constantly to show off their lavish interior decorating made it far too easy to note their habits over the years. Jenny was the type to busy herself in her room, so she wouldn't be a problem. After the last light was turned off, I set to work, stalking quietly around the back of their house. I was pleasantly surprised to find they didn't lock their windows. Granted, our neighborhood was a safe one, but you never know when some deranged maniac may want in. I won't go into the gory details. I'll let the news take care of that for me. Let's just say there's a reason that night earned me the name of the Red Christmas Killer. I mean, don't get me wrong, the police interviewed me, but they could never really pin anything on me. I mean, I was so unassuming and I had an alibi. So from there, it sort of just became a holiday tradition for me. Every December, I find a family too engrossed in material possessions and too far gone from the charitable origins of Christmas. I stalk them and I brutally murder them. Every last one of them. It's surprisingly easy. I can blend in almost anywhere. I don't look particularly unusual. I mean, you could walk past me in a mall and think nothing of it. I'm the perfect predator for this kind of hunting. This year marks my 10th Red Christmas, and I like to think I've established my own little tradition pretty well. I mean, you don't really see quite as many stampedes these days. I like to think that I'm weeding out bad ones, even if it's just once a year. So, remember, the holidays are supposed to be about giving and charity. So try not to get too self-centered and materialistic. Or I may be the one who visits you on Christmas Eve, not Santa.
Lily coughed quietly as she got herself settled on the antique chair, accompanying an equally antique dining table. She had her camera ready and a pen and notepad handy in case she wanted to quickly jot something down. The man sitting across from her watched with some bemusement, as though the spectacle of her trying to be as professional as possible was a quaint little custom of a culture far beneath his own. The man had a certain kind of elegance that attracted Lily to him in the first place. The air about him whispered other and different than the hundreds of people that she passed by every day. And the reporter inside her just knew there was a story waiting to be told. She coughed again, a little harder than last time, and worked to conceal the mucus she had to swallow that came up with the cough. After clearing her throat and turning the camera on, she finally began the interview. I'm here with Mr. Malcolm, who has kindly agreed to an interview. Milcom, not Malcolm. The man interrupted with a bland expression. His eyes remained the same impassive stance, but there was a queer light reflecting behind the eyes, as though some inner fire burned within them. Lily quickly shook her head to clear the sudden hypnotism his eyes seemed to produce, and corrected herself. Mr. Milcom, thank you for allowing me the chance to ask you a few questions. Of course, he replied. But please, just Milcom. No need for such formal titles. He smiled at the last bit, amused by some inside joke he shared with someone unknown. Lily coughed once more, a quick hacking cough that brought up more mucus. She hadn't recalled feeling sick when she woke up, but as the day passed, her health started to slowly decline with the onset of a summer cold. Milcom, bemused once again, offered her a silk handkerchief from the breast pocket of his brilliant black suit. The silk felt cool against Lily's skin, and she did her best not to soil it. After his refusal of the return of the handkerchief, she continued on with the interview. "So tell me a little bit about yourself, Milcom," she said in her most professional tone. "What would you like to know? Pray tell." Milcom responded, a subtle lilt to his voice. "Well, where are you from? What was it like growing up? Do you have any interesting anecdotes you would like to share?" Lily asked eagerly. Milcom raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow at the questions, pondering how he should answer. Finally, he gave a sigh as though regretting having to answer the questions, but responded nonetheless. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you, dear one." He replied, his tone slightly ominous. The answer seemed to startle Lily, but she plowed ahead. She just knew that if she could get him to talk, all sorts of wonderful and interesting stories would unfold in front of them. Their words caught on the wind like the notes of a wind chime. "Oh, nonsense," she chided. "I have heard my fair share of tall tales. Please, I would love to hear them, and I'm sure my viewers would too." She gave him her best pleading smile, but to Milcom it just came across as a small child begging their mother for more sweets. Sighing once again, Milcom resettled himself in the chair and began his tale. "Well, you really wouldn't know where I'm from, as it's too Byzantine for children such as yourself, but I'll humor you, dear one. You see, I come from a place far away from here, farther than any human could ever really fathom." Lily looked at him, unable to keep the skepticism off her face. She had expected exaggeration, but nothing like this. Milcom noted her skepticism with a slight smile and continued his story. "There really isn't a name for it. I live there with one other being, my sister, I suppose you could say. We came from our home, sprung up from the ground like a sunflower does each spring." He smiled again at Lily, a little warmer this time, as though he was remembering something pleasant. "My sister and I were the only ones to exist back then. We didn't mind it too much, though. There were countless ways to entertain such young beings as us. A whole universe to explore, to create, to destroy." He said the last word with satisfaction. "That was how we learned what each of us could do best. My sister was a marvel at creating things. The worlds she built from sand, or the tears from her eyes, glistening beautiful worlds, lush with creatures and plants that lived in such harmony. I, on the other hand, was the master of destruction. Whatever she could create, no matter how masterfully done, I could destroy with a quick flick of my hand. She didn't mind this at first. It gave her the opportunity to create something new, more miraculous than the last. But after a while, we became bored of the same routine. While our little game was amusing, things had gotten stale. We yearned for more sentient beings such as ourselves, but no matter how far we searched, we always came up empty." Milcom looked down sadly at this, his expression showing true sorrow over the revelation he and his sister came to. Lily suppressed the urge to cough and interrupt, having become utterly enthralled in his story and voice. Milcom looked up and noticed the look on Lily's face and smiled. "Once we figured that out, my sister and I decided that she would create the very thing we craved. But we had to make it the perfect world for them too, something that would be worthy of such brilliance." He waved his hands around, signaling to the room around them. "My sister did such a beautiful job. The beings she created were gorgeous, perfect replications of herself and I. It took everything in me to curb the desire to destroy them right then and there. But doing so would have upset my dear sister greatly, and the beings were undeserving of that, at first. But as time went on, the beings we created began to worship us as gods, and that was something we didn't want. Their fervor and their beliefs were so strong that the cities and monuments they created were destroyed. Civilizations no longer lived peacefully and constantly warred with one another. They did this in our names, they would tell us, in the hopes that they'd gain some favor from their gods, and that we would bless them with whatever it was they thought they deserved. The fire in Milcom's eyes shined brighter as he said these words, and a chill went down Lily's spine. She could feel the anger emanating from Milcom, could almost see the entire thing happening in her mind. We were disgusted, to say the least, to see the things my sister created perform such grotesque actions, all in our names. We finally had enough when a shepherd sacrificed his young son in my sister's name. A look of hatred quickly spread across Milcom's elegant features before being replaced with one of malicious glee. My sister cried and wailed as she watched the blade come down on the small body. The crimson shade of blood poured into the stream next to them, turning it into an ugly shade of brown. I couldn't take it any longer and destroyed everything she created. But it wasn't enough, he said sadly. The universe cried out with my sister, mourning the death of the being she created. My sister, however, was determined to try again and fix the mistake that she had made with the first ones. He paused for a moment, unsure of himself. Lily cleared her throat once again. What happened? Milcom smiled again at her question, seeing her as the same child eagerly awaiting a bedtime story. She remade the first world she created, and made a second form of beings. They were even more magnificent than the last, perfect in every way. This time, we resisted the urge to live among them, knowing what had happened the last time we did so. He looked down sadly once again, and Lily knew where the story was headed. The same thing happened. It didn't matter if we were there or not. They inherently knew we existed, that she created them, and that they owed everything to her. This time, however, they didn't revere me alongside my sister. No, I was something to be feared, a monster hiding in every dark corner of the world, just waiting to tempt the chaste maiden or goodly man into doing wickedness. This time, I sent a giant wave of black water, smiting each and every one of them until they were soggy carcasses, floating among the waves. Lily interrupted Milcom's story with another round of fitful coughs that she could not suppress. She grabbed the delicate handkerchief, no longer caring about ruining it, and hacked up one of the dreaded mucuses that was clogging her airways. Milcom waited patiently for her to finish, acting as though he had all the time in the world. When her coughing finally subsided, he continued on, without hesitation. After this, I knew there was something wrong about the beings, no matter how many times she tinkered with them before finishing. There was an inherent need to worship and destroy, something they likely got from me. My sister refused to believe this, though, even after many iterations with the same results. By this point, though, I had come up with a new way to entertain ourselves. That was the whole point of creating these things, wasn't it? Milcom asked, not really caring whether Lily responded or not. She was skeptical at first, my sister, but it didn't take much to convince her. So we put sort of a wager on the game. Whoever predicted the right outcome would get to decide how the next iteration would go. They would get to decide how the beings looked, what kind of world they lived in, and which path in their faith was the correct one, and which was the wrong one. My poor naive sister always bet that you would do good and be good. I, on the other hand, always wagered that you would follow the same path you had done countless times. You would always destroy, always hate, always kill. It's certainly been fun these last few eons, if I do say so myself. He smiled warmly at Lily, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. How often did either of you win? How many times have you played? Lily asked, still not quite understanding where his story was headed. Oh, I'd say I've won about 90% of the rounds. As far as how many? Far too many to count. Some rounds last a very long time. Some are very short. But all of them are quite entertaining. Well, except for this current round. A look of slight revulsion flashed across his face. The fire in his eyes burned even brighter, and Lily felt like she was burning under his gaze. We aren't sure what happened this time around. Maybe something in the makeup of you, I don't know, but something definitely took root inside of you. Something toxic. Something that could have never come from us. Lily coughed violently and sputtered. You? What do you mean, you? Milcom continued to look disgusted, no longer caring whether it showed or not. You? Do you honestly believe you came from nothing? Do you honestly believe you were some kind of cosmic accident, where all of the elements came together at the right time, at the right place? The arrogance of you humans, of all the times we've created and recreated you, not once have you humans ever shown the kind of arrogance and evil that you produce now. It's repugnant. He heaved a great sigh and continued. That's why my sister and I have decided to end this on a draw. We'll wipe everything from the game board and start over, hopefully without this fatal flaw you seem to possess. Wait, what? Lily asked, frantic as she began to cough even more, blood pouring out of her mouth. She looked up at Milcom, panicked, as he made to move closer to her. She jumped up in her seat as he inched closer to her and fell, sprawled on the floor. More coughing and more blood spewed from Lily in rivers across the elegant rug beneath her. Milcom knelt down beside her and gently wiped the blood from her face with a silken handkerchief. He did this tenderly, like a father who was trying to comfort his daughter. It's already starting, I see. I doubt it'll last long, sweet Lily, but it really is time for the next round to start. He got up and lightly dusted his suit pants, unfazed by the blood seeping into the fabric. Lily coughed again and struggled to speak. But how? How is this possible? I don't want to die. Milcom looked down at her, a look of delight on his face. How, you ask? Why would I explain that to such an imperfect being? As for you not wanting to die, well, take comfort in the fact that you're not the only one right now. He turned and waved his hand in a flourish as the television set suddenly came on. The screen showed frantic news reporters telling the news of mass deaths occurring globally, where people were falling where they stood, choking on their own blood as their lungs filled with the life force. Clips of religious leaders flashed across the screen, all of them speaking through the fits of bloody coughs, shouting about the end days. No, Lily said weakly. Her eyes grew heavy and her life slipped from her body. Why tell me all of this if you're just gonna kill us? Because I was feeling particularly bored, and I've never told one of you the true story of your creation, or the role that you play in my sister and I's game. I thought it would amuse me. Milcom then bent down one last time, and softly said, Don't worry, dear Lily. You'll be even better the next time around.
Growing up in Vermont meant bonfires, Ben & Jerry's ice cream, the most beautiful autumn leaves, and the best maple syrup. It also meant the weirdness that is the region known as the Bennington Triangle, which I didn't learn about until the summer I turned 20. To this day, I wish I'd never found out about that cursed place. My best friend since childhood was Diane, and she always had been an avid ghost hunter. She loved dragging me around along to anywhere that was supposedly haunted, even if we weren't allowed to be there. The Green Mountain Cemetery, Sabin's Pasture, and the Community College of Vermont were just a few of our many stops. I never believed in the supernatural, and for most of my life, I just thought that her midnight graveyard visits and trips to supposedly haunted buildings were a waste of time. My mind was forced to change in the course of a single night in 1983. Our junior year of college had started, and Diane proposed a weekend camping trip to one of the forests in the southern part of the state. She even proposed that there wouldn't be any ghost hunting on this trip, which was a very nice change of pace. I just wanted to relax for a few days out in nature before the harsh Vermont winter drove us to stay inside. A week after she set up the trip, we found ourselves in the middle of the woods outside the tiny town of Somerset, Vermont on the morning of October 12th, and soon we had set up a nice campsite. We planned to do some hiking and swimming while we were there, so the rest of the first day was spent in lazy bliss as we canoed, chatted, and fished. That night we cooked up the trout that we caught, and it was a peaceful night spent under the stars. I slept great and woke up excited for our hike the next day. We got an early start on our trek up to Glastonbury Mountain, and by late afternoon we had reached the summit. We rested at the top for a while and roasted some burgers over a small fire for dinner. We made sure to thoroughly extinguish the fire, and as the sun began to bleed out, we made our way back down the mountain on the side that would bring us closer to our camp. I wasn't looking forward to hiking in the dark, but I knew I would be fine as long as I wasn't alone. Diane and I also made sure to wear bright colors, myself in a neon yellow and her in a flame red, to make it easier to see each other. We had been extra smart and had expected to be heading back to camp in the dark, so we had headlamps ready to go when the last of the light faded. We had made it about a third of the way down when we heard crying. I stopped mid-trail, scanning the area to see what it was. It was clearly the crying of a small child. Not the woman-like cries of the mountain lion or another animal. I had spent enough time in the woods to know the difference, and something about this cry unnerved me. Not a single person lived in the mountain itself, and we hadn't seen anyone at all in the time that we had been there for. I strained my eyes, but I couldn't see any flashlights or lanterns through the dense thicket. I thought I caught a glimpse of something red moving further along the trees, but it was gone as soon as I blinked. I turned back to ask Diane what she thought was going on, but she was heading off the trail and into the trees. I yelled at her to come back, but she refused, saying that she couldn't just leave a kid alone in the woods. I tried to point out that a family was probably camping nearby, but she ignored me and kept walking towards the sound. Against my better judgment, I followed, hesitating before I stepped off the trail. I didn't want her running through the inky wilderness and getting lost or hurt. But neither did I feel comfortable going off trail in a place that neither of us knew. Within 10 minutes, I regretted my decision. I had been able to see her for the first few minutes, but then I lost sight of her shirt. Even the sound of her rapid footsteps crunching the dead leaves began to fade, and no amount of shouting had brought her back. I listened, trying to pinpoint any sound, when I saw a flash of red out of the corner of my eye. I was so relieved that Diane had returned, I whipped around, a grin on my face. My relief was immediately replaced with confusion. No one was there. And after a few seconds, it dawned on me that I still hadn't heard a sound. A moment later, a tug on my sleeve made me scream. I looked down in horror, my heartbeat drumming in my ears, and I saw a little boy in a red jacket. He was looking up at me with huge, tear-filled eyes, and I felt my fear soften slightly. "Hey kid, where are your parents at?" "I don't know. Mommy was here, but now she's not. I crouched down to eye level, making sure my headlamp wasn't blinding him. What's your name? Paul. I'm Jeanette. It's nice to meet you, Paul. He stuck out his hand like a little adult, and I shook it with an amused smile. He was a cute kid, and for the first time, I was so glad that we had gone off trail to find him. Let's go look for your mom and my friend, okay? He nodded trustingly, and he slipped his hand into mine. We had no idea which direction to take, so we made our way further into the dense woodland. I kept us going in a straight line from the path, and we made sure to call Diane and his mom every few minutes. I was getting more and more nervous about going deeper into the forest, but I still couldn't bring myself to abandon my friend. Nearly 2 hours later, we ran into the trail again, and was just very close to our campsite. I was hoping that Diane had been smart enough to wait there for me if she had made it this far, and I was extremely worried at this point. We both had a small flare gun on us in case of an emergency, and that was the only thing assuring me that she was still okay. I got a fire going since Paul's hand was frigid, and I offered to warm him up with some cocoa. He politely declined and curled up in a camping chair by the fire. I sat there in our other chair for about an hour waiting for Diane to return, and at some point I must have dozed off. When I woke up, there was a woman by the fire with a weirdly blank look on her face. I blinked rapidly to shake the sleepiness from my eyes, thinking she was a dream, but the figure remained. I was confused and began to panic when it dawned on me who she was. Hi, you must be Paul's mom. I'm so glad you found us. My name is Paula. Oh, that's cute that you named him after you. He is not my child. Oh, sorry. She hadn't moved, and the silence stretched tensely between us. I yawned and rubbed my eyes since I thought I was seeing things. A darkness began to seep from her body, and at first I thought it was just the firelight casting odd shadows or my eyes playing tricks. But it began to pool from her skeletal fingers on the ground. I swore, quickly scrambling out of the chair and away from her. By then I had noticed that Paul wasn't in sight, and I screamed for him. The woman still hadn't moved, but the ooze reached my tent. It began to dissolve the nylon, an acidic hiss warring with the crackling from the fire. I don't remember anything after that except for running towards the car and trying to explain to the police what had happened. They didn't believe me, of course. When we arrived back at the campsite, they blamed drinking and an unguarded fire for the state of the tent, even though there was no alcohol in my system. They began searching for Diane, but never found any trace of another person. 5 years later, her case went cold. And I wouldn't be writing this down if my 12-year-old nephew hadn't asked me to for a school project he was working on about people who have seen ghosts. When I asked why my nephew picked me to interview, he looked up at me, just like little Paul had done, and handed me an old yellowed newspaper article dated October 14th, 1950. It showed a picture of a little boy in a familiar red jacket, and the headline was about his disappearance near Glastonbury Mountain on October 12th, 1950. My nephew tugged gently at my sleeve, his eyes wide as he stared at the tears flowing down my cheeks. Don't cry, Auntie. Not everyone gets to meet 2 ghosts in one night. 2? Yeah, don't you ever go to the library? I shook my head, and he exasperatedly pulled out a second article from his school folder. This one had a picture of the woman I had seen that night, and it was about her disappearance in the same area in 1946. They had both been wearing red when they disappeared, and so had Diane. I know I'll never go back there, but if I were to, I believe that I would see 3 ghosts.
1992 was not my year. They had slowly been cutting my hours at the fabric store over the course of several months, so I had to take a second job as a waitress just to make ends meet after I divorced my husband. He's a lawyer and was the main breadwinner between the two of us. I had decided to surprise him one day and take him to lunch when I found him in his office with his secretary doing, well, I'd rather not say. I mean, how cliché is that? He didn't even bother to lock the door. Oh, I suppose I could have forgiven him this one time and suggested we go to couples counseling before I serve him with the divorce papers. But if he did it this time, he would do it again. I have more respect for myself than that. And anyway, who's to say that he hadn't done it before, and that was just the first time I caught him? Besides, he should have thought of the consequences before putting his hands on that woman. I didn't even keep his last name. Not only did he lose a loving wife who would have given him the moon if she could, but he also lost the prospect of having a family with her. That's right. We were going to have a family. Unfortunately, we had trouble conceiving, so we had filed the paperwork to adopt. After the divorce went through, I had the awkward task of going to the adoption agency and informing them that we needed our application annulled due to us no longer being married. He refused to go back, so I had to do it alone. However, there was a silver lining to it. The agent was very helpful and informed me that if I still wanted to adopt, I could fill out another application as a single parent. I felt my spirits lift a little. I did still want a child. I wasn't sure if now was the right time with my financial situation, but I knew that there was at least one child without a home that would be happy to have one, even if it was with a busy mother. I was going to do whatever I had to do to give the child the best life possible. I agreed, and the agent walked me through what I needed to do and what paperwork I needed to fill out. Maybe I would finally have the child I longed for. The wait was excruciating and long, several months at least. I wasn't about to lose hope, though. I simply used the waiting time as an opportunity to save enough money to at least give the child a new wardrobe, new toys, and furniture for their bedroom. I had actually just gotten back from shopping when I got a phone call from my ex-husband's mistress. She wanted to tell me that her and my ex had just had a little baby boy named Cyrano. I hung up on her. I was getting ready to have a child of my own. I didn't want to hear my replacement gloat about how happy she is to be a mother herself before me with the man she thinks she stole. Finally, I got a phone call on a Friday about a little 7-year-old girl that they were having trouble placing. The poor darling. She must be torn apart that no family would take her, so I happily agreed to meet her. I was so excited I couldn't sit still. I had showered, put on my best clothes. I even wore a little makeup. I wanted to look my best for who may very well be my new daughter. I practically wore a hole in my floor from pacing until I finally heard the car drive up. The caseworker drove a charcoal Subaru with tinted windows. He got out of the car and opened up one of the side doors. The little girl that emerged wasn't exactly what I was expecting. I've heard stories of children showing up to their respective foster parents looking worn out and disheartened, carrying all of their belongings in plastic trash bags. But this little girl was very well put together. She was wearing a navy blue jumper dress over a white turtleneck, white tights, and Mary Jane's with the buckle strap that matched the color of her jumper. Her long black hair was pulled back into a braid so as not to hide her vibrant green eyes, which seemed even brighter against her tan skin. What a beautiful child, I thought. How could anyone not want her? As the two of them got closer to the house, I realized that she was carrying a small ivory box with gold trimmings. I greeted them at the door, and the caseworker introduced her as Mercy Preston. She smiled very sweetly at me and said, "I like you." I was thrilled that we got on so quickly, but I was a little put off by the sudden remark. I mean, she doesn't know anything about me. How can she decide she likes me just on our first meeting? Then she turned to the caseworker and said, "I want her to be my mother." He and I looked at each other, and he seemed to be just as surprised as I was. Then she ran in and made herself comfortable on my sofa after turning on the television. She was right at home. The caseworker just stood there scratching his head as he informed me that she usually isn't this friendly, especially to someone she'd just met. That's why they'd had trouble placing her. But it looks like she's found a home she really likes. I asked him if he needed to take her back to get the rest of her things.
"That won't be necessary. Her only possessions are the clothes on her back and that music box,"
he responded, pointing to the box in her hand. I made us some coffee and we sat at the table and went over the necessary paperwork of what would be needed to make the adoption official. Then the conversation shifted to her biological parents. John and Sarah Preston were their names. I would need both of their signatures on the paperwork to make the adoption legal. The caseworker left me with the paperwork and tried to take Mercy with him until it was signed, but she wouldn't budge. So he left and said he would take the rap for it if they ask about her. Then I heard a soft, simple melody from the living room. Mercy had opened her music box and was humming along as it played Amazing Grace. I sat down next to her as she hummed. The music box had a tiny angel in it that twirled as the music played to make it look like it was flying. I'm not religious myself, but that music box was an adorable little trinket. The next day, I had the day off from both jobs to take her shopping, so we went out to buy some new toys and some new clothes. I tried to get her to try on some clothes that were less stuffy than the ones she had on. She's a kid, after all. She needs to be free to wear whatever she wants. I showed her some clothes that were bright and colorful. I even found a top that had Princess Jasmine on it. She was one of the characters from Disney's newest movie, Aladdin. But no matter what I showed her, she only ever wanted jumper dresses, turtlenecks, and tights. I was thinking about clothes for the summertime, so I tried to coax her into maybe getting some cooler clothes by suggesting she try on a pair of jellies. All of the little girls her age seemed to like those for some reason. Mercy was perfectly happy with her Mary Janes, but she did want some in different colors so she could coordinate with the rest of her wardrobe. Her own words. She was very eloquently spoken for someone her age. She also never took her hair out of her braid. I'm sure her dress and her hair were habits left over from her previous home. In casual conversation, the caseworker had mentioned that her birth parents were Catholic. When we got home, she went out to the backyard to play while I went upstairs to put away her clothes. Just her clothes. She didn't want any toys, claiming that she had no need for earthly possessions. I felt sorry for her. Her biological parents were more strict on her than I thought. Then she said something strange.
"I'll have everything I need before my real mother comes."
I was sure she would want toys eventually, but for now I needed to let her cope with the move the way she was going to. As I was putting away her clothes, I glanced outside to see Mercy circling the yard. Slowly. Not running or skipping, just casually strolling. I looked at the marks on the fence and I realized that she had been scratching her nails along the fence as she strolled. Realizing that children do strange things, I tried not to let it get to me, and I called my neighbors to ask if their teenage son could watch Mercy tomorrow while I was at work. Yes, I know that people typically like to hire girls to watch over their child, but all the parents in the neighborhood have told me that Doyle is wonderful with their kids, and they absolutely adore him. So I thought, what's the harm in giving him a chance? Doyle was a perfect gentleman when I spoke to him. He told me that he usually plays his guitar at the coffee shop on Sundays, but that he would be happy to watch after Mercy instead. I finished the phone call and I looked outside again. She was still walking the circumference of the yard. The next morning I woke up to my alarm as usual. 7 a.m. on the dot. I knew it was early, so I decided to let Mercy sleep a little longer and kiss her goodbye when Doyle got there. I was at the cafe that morning, then at the fabric store that afternoon. So I put on my cafe uniform and name tag. As I was folding my apron for the fabric store later, I heard a soft knock on my door. It was Mercy. She was in her usual jumper dress and her hair was up already.
I'm ready, Mother. Those are strange church clothes.
The poor dear. She thought we were going to church. The Prestons must have really indoctrinated her into following a routine if she got up on her own to do all of that. We're not going to church, baby. I have to go to work. Mr. Doyle is going to look after you while I'm gone. Her eyes lit up when I said we weren't going to church. But when I told her that she was going to have a babysitter, she furrowed her brow and said,
I can look after myself.
As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Doyle was at the door already and had brought his guitar with him. I finished getting ready and kissed Mercy goodbye. When I left, she was sitting contentedly on the couch while Doyle played his guitar for her. We weren't allowed to have our phones while we were working at the cafe, so I kept it in the back with my purse. I was just coming out of the bathroom, changing out of my uniform to get ready for the fabric store, when 2 police officers walked into the cafe and made a beeline for me. They informed me that my daughter was currently at the police station. A teenage boy had dropped her off without a word, but he looked to be a little panicked. I had to call the manager of the fabric store to tell him of my situation and let him know that I wasn't going to be able to make it today. Before I called, though, I saw that Doyle had tried to call me 37 times while I was on the clock. Never left a single voicemail. I'll take that back. He left one, but there wasn't anything but silence. When I got to the police station, I saw Mercy sitting in a chair in the waiting area, playing with her music box. I was so worried I grabbed her and hugged her as tight as I could. She didn't look like she was hurt or anything, so why would Doyle just suddenly drop her off here? When I asked her what happened, she responded with,
I told you, Mother. I can look after myself.
I never did find out what happened with Doyle. When I went over to his house to get some answers, he was white as a sheet. As soon as he saw Mercy in my arms, he slammed the door in my face and quickly locked it behind him. Still confused, I finally took her home. When we pulled up, there was a red Jaguar sitting in my driveway. A sandy-haired man in a nice suit got out of the car, followed by a pretty brunette in a dress on the other side. She had a braid like the one Mercy had. The 2 of them looked straight at me as I got out of my own car. Suddenly Mercy ran out and went straight for the cab of the Jaguar, only to be stopped by the man. "Don't you dare touch my daughter!" I yelled at him. I had no idea who these people were, nor did I care. "What do you want?"
We're here to sign the paperwork. The adoption ain't legal till we sign.
Then I realized who they were. These were Mercy's birth parents. By the looks of it, they had come right after church. I thought they might at least wait until a weekday, but they didn't waste any time. I saw a figure moving inside the cab of the Jaguar, and Mercy shouted,
I know you're in there, Rachel. Come say hello to your little sister.
You leave my daughter alone, creature.
Creature? Did he just call their daughter a creature? No. My daughter? And they had another one? Was the pressure of 2 children too much for them? Whatever. Their loss, I suppose. All right, let's get this over with, I said. I went inside to get the paperwork, and they waited outside, never taking their eyes off of Mercy. They scribbled their signatures quickly, and I went inside to put it away. When I came back outside, Mrs. Preston was already in the car, but Mercy was speaking to Mr. Preston. I caught the last part of their conversation.
I don't know what you want me to say. I don't regret my decision, and neither does your mother.
She's not my mother. Not my real one.
What are you talking about?
You don't remember her, do you? She said you wouldn't. She said hypocrites make the tastiest partners.
Mercy giggled as I turned the corner, and I saw his face. His face was as white as Doyle's was, and his eyes had widened, as if caught in a sudden, terrifying memory.
Goodbye, John.
She skipped back inside, and as Mr. Preston started to get into his car, he looked me in the eyes and said,
God help you.
Later that night, I had fallen asleep on the sofa. I had cried myself to sleep when I got a call from the fabric store to tell me that they were letting me go because of my last-minute call-in. I couldn't live on the money from the cafe alone. I have a child to feed now. It was 1:27 a.m. when I heard a strange noise coming from Mercy's room. It almost sounded like a low growl. I carefully walked up to her room and opened the door slowly. I expected to see her sound asleep, but her bed was made and empty. Instead, there was a woman standing there with her back to me. I couldn't make out any facial features, but she spoke in a chillingly lilting voice.
Thank you, Miss Bellamy. Thank you for freeing my child.
Then she turned to me, and I saw her face. Her skin was a tan color, and her eyes were the same piercing green as Mercy's. She looked just like her. But that didn't make any sense. I thought Mrs. Preston was her birth mother. Then the color of her eyes disappeared, and 2-inch fangs pushed themselves through her gums as the corners of her mouth stretched across her face. I stood there in horror as her smile widened. Part of me didn't want to believe what I was seeing. But the next time she spoke, she did so in a voice I could feel in my chest.
I would have taken care of her myself, but only full-blooded demons are allowed to live with me. So I thought it best to let her stay with her father. Lucky for me, they already had a baby on the way, so the swap was easy. It was delicious.
Drool dripped from her fangs as she reminisced about her previous prey.
John was fun for a while. The man had some spicy ambitions. But Jesus Christ, he was annoying. With all of his God this and Jesus that. Hypocrites do make the tastiest partners. But he was stifling Mercy's potential.
I looked down at Mercy's still empty bed, and I began to panic a little. What have you done with her? Where's my daughter?
Nothing. She was gone when I came. But I know that wherever she is, she's making me proud.
Vicious laughter echoed into the night as a burst of flames suddenly engulfed the room, and the woman was gone. I lost everything in the fire. All of my books, my CDs, all of my photo albums, everything. Even the adoption papers burned. The only thing that remained virtually untouched except for a bit of soot was her music box. It was found open, with the angel inside, turned completely upside down. And the spring that suspended her in the air was coiled around her neck.
Don't look at the man wrapped in plastic. My uncle is a police officer. He typically does highway patrol and doesn't like to talk about work a lot because it's both mundane and unpleasant, and it's very rare something amusing happens. No one wants to hear about fatal accidents and speeding stops. They want to hear the story about the drunken college student who couldn't remember how to put his pants back on in the middle of an intersection during morning rush hour. Unfortunately, the funny stories are few and far between, so mostly he doesn't say anything. When I turned 16, my uncle had me drop by the police station, ostensibly to pick up something for my mom. It was a ruse. I found myself confronted by a number of his coworkers, took me aside, and had the talk with me. 2 talks, actually. One about going off to college in a few years and the dangers I would face, and to never leave my drink unattended, and don't walk around by myself after dark, and blah, 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 blah. The other was about driving. Cell phones weren't in heavy use at the time, so they didn't talk about texting, but they did warn me against having a lot of noisy friends in the car, always wearing a seatbelt, driving defensively, etc. I'd heard all of it before, but it was nice that he cared about my safety, I suppose. There was one officer, however, who told me something I hadn't heard. He was an older gentleman, probably near retirement, and he hung near the edge of the group until everyone was done with their stories meant to scare me into smart choices. Then he said he'd take me to say hi to my uncle, who was at his desk, and he told me something strange on the way there. "There's a man wrapped in plastic in the city," he said. "He hangs out around the edges of the highway. If you see him, don't look at his face. He'll be mostly covered, so you won't see it unless you really look. If you can't see his face, then how do you know it's a man?" I asked. I was a bit testy from being ambushed by all my uncle's coworkers and was not in the mood to indulge in ghost stories. "I guess I don't," he admitted. "But that's not important. Every now and then," he said, "they'd respond to an accident caused by a man covered in plastic. A motorist would spot a piece of trash by the side of the road, a big piece standing upright, and it would be wrapped in just the right way that it looked like a human figure. Just some stray debris blown around by the wind. Initially, the police thought the resulting accidents or near misses that occurred were from momentary distraction of trying to understand what they'd seen. But reports kept coming, and the trend was unmistakable. A human figure, swaddled in plastic, wrapped tight like the winding of a corpse. Even the head was covered. Everyone that saw it had crashed shortly after, or had a near miss. Everyone that saw the man's face died. I laughed a little and, thinking myself smart, asked how they knew seeing his face was the trigger if all the people that saw it died shortly after. His jaw tightened and something in me trembled, realizing that I'd asked something painful to him, a memory he tried to suppress. I began to think that maybe there was something to his story. He told me he'd responded to an accident many years ago. The man driving had survived. His wife had not. The man was hysterical, and the officer had tried to pull him away from the scene, tried to get him to go to the waiting ambulance. Anything to make him stop looking at his wife's crushed body. He remembered amidst the man's babbling that this was his fault and that he'd killed his wife. Untrue, but it was understandable that he'd blame himself. That the man had said he'd seen someone standing by the side of the road, and he'd glance only briefly, but his wife had turned in her seat to look back at him and see what the figure was doing. She'd started screaming, something about their face, how it was all wrong, and she had to get away from it. She started clawing at the door, trying to open it. And that's when the vehicle in the other lane had swerved without explanation and hit the passenger side, killing his wife. That's really fucked up, I said when he was finished, and his lips narrowed into a thin line, and he told me I shouldn't swear like that and didn't say anything else about the man in plastic. I asked my uncle about it later. He looked uncomfortable and shrugged and told me it was true that they had a lot of reports about a man in plastic. Just be careful, he said. Don't be distracted by anything on the side of the road, whether mundane or some weird local ghost story. It's been many years since that talk, and the idea of a man wrapped in plastic stuck with me. I'm not superstitious. I figure there had to be a logical explanation, that maybe people were mistaken in what they saw and the police were looking for a pattern that wasn't there. Well, if that's all there was to it, I wouldn't be posting. A few weeks ago, I saw the man in plastic. It was exactly as the older police officer said. He was unremarkable, merely another piece of debris blown up against the barrier separating the two sides of the highway. I would have paid it no attention if it weren't for the curve of the shoulders, the line of the legs. Unmistakably, a human figure, slate gray like an overcast sky, crinkled with musty light from the reflection of the plastic. I thought at first it was a man in a hoodie, inexplicably and dangerously leaning on the barrier in the middle of the highway. Then, as my car approached, I realized it was one solid piece covering him from head to toe. Looked like a funeral wrap, I thought, from the old tradition of winding the body in a sheet. My car drew even with where he stood. He shifted, his shoulders twisted, and he began to turn his head to me. I remembered my uncle's warning. I tore my eyes away just in time to see something fall from the vehicle in front of me. I thought in that instant that it was a washing machine that had fallen out of the back of the pickup in front of me. Later, after the police arrived, I realized it was something much bigger and far more sturdy, which helped explain what happened to the car that was right behind me. I swerved into the other lane. My uncle had told me to always keep track of where other cars are so that I knew where it was safe to maneuver in an emergency. And I'd been doing that, and I knew there were no cars riding along beside me. I missed the debris. The car that had been following perhaps a little too close behind me? Not so lucky. The front end of his car clipped the machinery. I saw it turn sideways, spinning from the impact. Saw it roll. It came to a stop in the grass on the shoulder. I pulled over, braking as hard as I dared, fumbling for my cell phone with shaking hands. I called 911, gave them my location, and then, disoriented and perhaps a little in shock, dropped the phone and went to go check on the other driver. The damage to his car was less than I expected. The frame was bent near the top of the driver's side door, the sides were dented, and the windshield was shattered. But that was all. He wasn't moving as I approached, and I honestly don't know why I kept going. He's dead, he's dead, he's dead, was all that was running through my mind. But then he raised his head and stared about him in confusion. He reached up a hand and touched the shattered windshield in shock. Then I was there by the car, and he unlocked the door, and I wrenched it open. He looked fine. There were no visible injuries. A laptop lay in the passenger side floor. I saw his face, he whimpered at me. I saw it. And then he wrapped his arms around his body and began to rock back and forth and screamed. A long, plaintive scream, and when his lungs were empty, he sucked in another breath and began screaming again. I felt helpless. I tried to get him to stop. I grabbed his shoulder and tried to hold him against the seat so he'd stop rocking, and he began to twist and thrash instead, moaning and weeping. So I let him go, and he just sat there and rocked and screamed and wept about the face he had seen. He did this until the ambulance arrived to take him away. I've been having nightmares about this every single night since it happened. About the accident, watching that car tumble, helpless to do anything. I dream about a man screaming and rocking, and I'm trying to get to him to help, but he's always out of reach. And I dream about that man in plastic. And I wake up just before he turns to look at me, panting and shaking and cold with sweat. I'm crying a lot. I get panicky when I see a pickup with anything in the back. And after I stop, I have to sit there for a moment and catch my breath and wait for my heart to slow down. This is all normal, I feel, considering what happened. I'm trying to work through it, to not let it keep me from doing something so vital as driving. I've gotten an appointment with a therapist scheduled for next week. I found out what happened to that man. I asked my uncle, and he came over to my house that evening. He sat down at my kitchen table while I made tea and asked if I really wanted to know. And that was enough to indicate that the news was not going to be good. I sat down opposite him and said that, yes, I wanted to know. He died, my uncle told me. On the way to the hospital, he'd started growing more and more frantic and aggressive, screaming the same thing over and over again. The face was wrong. The face was wrong. The face was wrong. Then he'd gone into a seizure and was dead before they even reached the hospital. They believed the laptop, which was in the passenger side seat, had struck him in the head when the car rolled, which caused bleeding in the brain. I thanked him, said maybe knowing would give me some closure, and my uncle left. He seemed uncomfortable enough telling me that the man had died. So I didn't want to worry him further by saying I had seen the man in plastic. You see, I'm encountering him everywhere now. I catch glimpses of debris on the side of the road, dirty off-white sheets, shiny black tatters fluttering in the breeze, or stained gray scraps. And each time, I can't help but look, only for a moment, just long enough to realize that it has taken the shape of a man. I look back at the road before he can turn his head, before I see his face. I wonder, has he always been there and I'm finally noticing? Or is he targeting me? Should I have died instead of the man in the car behind me? I don't know. But if you see something like a man standing at the side of the highway, don't look. Keep driving. Don't look any longer than a second, in case he turns his head and you see his face.
A man took my sister and hid in my closet. One summer afternoon, my mom walks in and says she's going for a walk, and she's taking my sisters. I was a bit surprised as my mom usually likes to walk alone, but I guess she didn't trust me to look after my sisters. I didn't want to go, so I stayed at home. I was 8, but my mom sometimes left me at home alone because she thought it taught me resilience or something like that. My mom leaves and I started to get this feeling like I wasn't alone. I watched TV for a bit before hearing the back door fully open and footsteps approaching the lounge room. I freaked out and called my mom, and she was just as frantic as she said one of my sisters had run away from her. She told me to wait at the house in case my sister came back there. I started freaking out and I went into my bedroom to hide. About 10 minutes later, I heard a noise coming from inside of one of my cupboards. I felt a huge sigh of relief when I heard my sister's voice coming from the cupboard, and I told her to come out, but she didn't. I opened the door and saw a grown man sitting in the cupboard. I screamed and ran outside, only to be greeted by the cops, who my mom had called about my missing sister. I told them a man was in my cupboard, a man I didn't know, and they ran inside the house. About 10 minutes later, my mom shows up and tells the police about her missing daughter, but the police had already found her. The man had kidnapped my sister and then ran back to my house, came inside and hid in my cupboard, probably trying to get me next. The man was arrested and my mother told me to never talk about it again as it brought her too much pain. We moved, and that was the last of it.
"My aunt will be down presently, Mr. Nuttall," said a very self-possessed young lady of 15. "In the meantime, you must try to put up with me." Frampton Nuttall endeavoured to say the correct something which should duly flatter the niece of the moment without unduly discounting the aunt that was to come. Privately, he doubted more than ever whether these formal visits on a succession of total strangers would do much towards helping the nerve cure which he was supposed to be undergoing. "I know how it will be," his sister had said when he was preparing to migrate to this rural retreat. "You will bury yourself down there and not speak to a living soul, and your nerves will be worse than ever from moping. I shall just give you letters of introduction to all the people I know there. Some of them, as far as I can remember, were quite nice." Frampton wondered whether Mrs. Sappleton, the lady to whom he was presenting one of the letters of introduction, came into the nice division. "Do you know many of the people round here?" asked the niece, when she judged that they had had sufficient silent communion. "Hardly a soul," said Frampton. "My sister was staying here, at the rectory, you know, some 4 years ago, and she gave me letters of introduction to some of the people here." He made the last statement in a tone of distinct regret. "Then you know practically nothing about my aunt," pursued the self-possessed young lady. "Only her name and address," admitted the caller. He was wondering whether Mrs. Sappleton was in the married or widowed state. An undefinable something about the room seemed to suggest masculine habitation. "Her great tragedy happened just 3 years ago," said the child. "That would be since your sister's time." "Her tragedy?" asked Frampton. Somehow, in this restful country spot, tragedies seemed out of place. "You may wonder why we keep that window wide open on an October afternoon," said the niece, indicating a large French window that opened onto a lawn. "It is quite warm for the time of year," said Frampton. "But has that window got anything to do with the tragedy?" "Out through that window, 3 years ago to a day, her husband and her 2 young brothers went off for their day's shooting. They never came back. In crossing the moor to their favourite snipe shooting ground, they were all 3 engulfed in a treacherous piece of bog. It had been that dreadful wet summer, you know, and places that were safe in other years gave way suddenly without warning. Their bodies were never recovered. That was the dreadful part of it." Here the child's voice lost its self-possessed note and became falteringly human. "Poor aunt always thinks that they will come back some day. They and the little brown spaniel that was lost with them, and walk in at that window just as they used to do. That is why the window is kept open every evening till it is quite dusk. Poor dear aunt. She has often told me how they went out, her husband with his white waterproof coat over his arm, and Ronnie, her youngest brother, singing, 'Bertie, why do you bound?' as he always did to tease her, because she said it got on her nerves. Do you know, sometimes on still, quiet evenings like this, I almost get a creepy feeling that they will all walk in through that window." She broke off with a little shudder. It was a relief to Frampton when the aunt bustled into the room with a whirl of apologies for being late in making her appearance. "I hope Vera has been amusing you," she said. "She has been very interesting," said Frampton. "I hope you don't mind the open window," said Mrs. Sappleton briskly. "My husband and brothers will be home directly from shooting, and they always come in this way. They've been out for snipe in the marshes today, so they'll make a fine mess over my poor carpets. So like you menfolk, isn't it?" She rattled on cheerfully about the shooting and the scarcity of birds, and the prospects for duck in the winter. To Frampton it was all purely horrible. He made a desperate but only partially successful effort to turn the talk onto a less ghastly topic. He was conscious that his hostess was giving him only a fragment of her attention, and her eyes were constantly straying past him to the open window and the lawn beyond. It was certainly an unfortunate coincidence that he should have paid his visit on this tragic anniversary. "The doctors agree in ordering me complete rest, an absence of mental excitement, and avoidance of anything in the nature of violent physical exercise," announced Frampton, who laboured under the tolerably widespread delusion that total strangers and chance acquaintances are hungry for the least detail of one's ailments and infirmities, their cause and cure. "On the matter of diet they are not so much in agreement," he continued. "No?" said Mrs. Sappleton, in a voice which only replaced a yawn at the last moment. Then she suddenly brightened into alert attention, but not to what Frampton was saying. "Here they are at last," she cried, "just in time for tea, and don't they look as if they were muddy up to the eyes?" Frampton shivered slightly and turned towards the niece with a look intended to convey sympathetic comprehension. The child was staring out through the open window with dazed horror in her eyes. In a chill shock of nameless fear, Frampton swung round in his seat and looked in the same direction. In the deepening twilight, 3 figures were walking across the lawn towards the window. They all carried guns under their arms, and one of them was additionally burdened with a white coat hung over his shoulders. A tired brown spaniel kept close at their heels. Noiselessly they neared the house, and then a hoarse young voice chanted out of the dusk, "I said, Bertie, why do you bound?" Frampton grabbed wildly at his stick and hat. The hall door, the gravel drive, and the front gate were dimly noted stages in his headlong retreat. A cyclist coming along the road had to run into the hedge to avoid an imminent collision. "Here we are, my dear," said the bearer of the white mackintosh, coming in through the window. "Fairly muddy, but most of it's dry. Who was that who bolted out as we came up?" "A most extraordinary man, a Mr. Nuttall," said Mrs. Sappleton. "Could only talk about his illnesses, and dashed off without a word of goodbye or apology when you arrived. One would think he had seen a ghost." "I expect it was the spaniel," said the niece calmly. "He told me he had a horror of dogs. He was once hunted into a cemetery somewhere along the banks of the Ganges by a pack of pariah dogs, and had to spend the night in a newly dug grave with the creatures snarling and grinning and foaming just above him. Enough to make anyone lose their nerve." Romance at short notice was her speciality.
Chloe had always been a bit of a germaphobe. It was something she couldn't help. From the time she could consciously remember, the thought of gerbs and catching some dreaded disease had hooked its terrifying tendrils into the deepest part of her mind, taunting her with every sniffle and every cough that her classmates produced. It didn't help either that her mother was an extreme mysophobe and kept bottles of hand sanitizer on nearly every surface of the house. None of the other children in Chloe's class understood her fear of germs or her aversion to playing with them during recess. Her teachers always felt a little bad for Chloe, knowing that the first sign of a cold from one of the other students, Chloe would run out of the class screaming and cry until her equally frantic mother picked her up from school. Their fears eventually won out over common sense, and Chloe was homeschooled from then on. But like all things pervasive, a cold would still creep into their quaint little home, and both mother and daughter would be devastatingly sick since neither of them ever built up an immunity to it or any other common ailments. Still, life went on, and Chloe grew up to be a gorgeous young lady. Unfortunately, her childhood fears never subsided, and after an emergency appendectomy, Chloe turned into an agoraphobic as well. Not that that particularly mattered to her. Her home was the only sanctuary Chloe had ever needed, and with the advancements of modern technology and the internet, she was never left wanting for anything. Her local grocery store was even kind enough to deliver her purchases to her door and left them in a crate she installed next to the front door. Everything she received from the outside world was quickly sanitized and thoroughly inspected before being allowed across her threshold. This worked out perfectly for Chloe, and her world continued to function seamlessly. That is, until the first blackout. It happened one night while Chloe was sleeping. A heavy rainstorm had been booming raucous thunder and frequently illuminated her room with a brilliant light show. She didn't mind this at all, though, and felt comforted by having the authentic sound of a thunderstorm to lull her into a deep sleep. It was this majestic symphony that kept her from knowing that the power had gone out at one point during the night, letting unfiltered air in and the sanitation module within her little crate to malfunction. When she awoke the next morning, Chloe could not tell that something was amiss. As she went on with her normal morning routine and checked the latest job boards from her workplace to get started on the next assignment. For a quick moment, she noticed a subtle change in the odor of the air in her home, but the strangeness of it was quickly forgotten as the cheerful tinkling of the doorbell sounded around her, alerting her to this week's groceries. Chloe was in no hurry, however, to retrieve them from the box, knowing that they'd be safe for a little while she went to work on writing her next story. The job board had insisted that it needed to be turned in that night, and the subject matter was not something she was entirely familiar with. So there her groceries sat, in the malfunctioning box, accumulating germs and minuscule signs of decay. It wasn't until she typed the last word to her story before Chloe finally decided to take her groceries out of the box and place them in the fridge. To her surprise, however, she found a homeless man rummaging through the box. The locking mechanism had not shut properly, and there he was, bold as he pleased, grabbing whatever he could out of the box and contaminating all the other items within it. Unfortunately, Chloe didn't realize this catastrophe before she opened the sliding door to the inside of her room. Thousands of spores and dust particles flitted past her, filling her nostrils and coating her lungs. She coughed violently to remove the disgusting air from her body and quickly retched all over the items in her box. And this was met with angry shouts from the man, screaming, "What the fuck, lady? You just threw up all over my hand!" Chloe could care less. With a speed that she didn't know she possessed, she shut the sliding door and sealed it before sprinting to the kitchen sink to continue to vomit. Her imagination ran wild as the contents of her dinner from the night before flooded the pristine basin of the sink, and the frantic shouts of the homeless men echoed into the home, a perfect counterpoint to the sound of her retching. By the time she was done, the homeless man had scampered off, likely to enjoy the spoils of his victory. But Chloe was left a quivering mess on the floor of her immaculate kitchen. She had no idea what to do, as she had never gone through anything like this before. But her mind conjured all sorts of horrors as the panic she felt earlier rose to catastrophic levels. She loathed the idea of venturing out into the world and going to the emergency room where all sorts of sick people would be waiting in the lobby, eager to share whatever diseases they carried. Also, It was Saturday, so her usual doctor would not be in his office and likely wouldn't enjoy having to make a home visit on his weekend. This left Chloe frozen on the floor, indecisiveness keeping her immobile. She wasn't sure how much time had passed before she found the courage to get off the floor and look into a mirror. She had imagined all sorts of terrors the mirror would reflect, like black plague-ridden spots or rotting pieces of flesh flaking off just like the crust of a perfectly baked croissant. Instead, the only reflection she was greeted with was that of her own beautiful face, with fear in her eyes. Chloe laughed a little at that, realizing her fear was silly. Even if she had caught something from the vagrant, there was absolutely no way it would work as quickly as she had feared. Still, a niggling worm of doubt settled in her mind, never letting her forget her brush with death, even if she was just being dramatic. But for the first time in Chloe's life, she didn't fear germs or the outside world. She wasn't quite ready to face everything, but the sun seemed brighter to her, and the taste of the air in her room was sweeter, more heady. She was elated at the new sensations she began to feel, and goosebumps erupted all over her body as though experiencing touch for the first time ever. She laughed at this, feeling euphoric. Was the world really as dangerous as she had always assumed? Were the nightmarish diseases and epidemics she always read about really as bad as her mother always made it seem? Surely not. After all, she didn't die suddenly and painfully from the few seconds of interaction with that unclean man. Just what had she missed in her short life? She couldn't help wondering. But what could she do now with this newfound freedom of hers? Maybe she'd walk to the grocery store herself for the first time and buy her groceries like any other red-blooded human would. She could imagine the looks on the owners' faces as she sauntered in, happy as a clam, picking out cans of vegetables that had been touched by who knows how many others. She would even hug them and experience voluntary physical contact for the first time since she was a small child. That was exactly what Chloe wanted to do. But she knew she couldn't go out into the world dressed in pajamas that were soiled by the vomit she had expelled earlier that day. As Chloe made her way to the shower, a thought struck, quick as lightning like the night before. What if she did catch something once she walked out that door? Sure, she obviously wasn't sick now from her exposure to the homeless man, but that didn't mean it wasn't somewhere inside of her, biding its time before unleashing its fury on her fragile system. Chloe froze again, paralyzed with fear, as the water from the shower head strummed loudly against the tub. Worries marched inside of her head, each more frightening than the last. Finally, her fear won out, and she practically leaped to the shower to scrub every inch of her body. She scoured her body roughly with her loofah, making the skin red and angry with each aggressive swipe. She shampooed her hair, and then redid it 10 more times, never feeling satisfied that she was clean enough. 2 whole hours passed before Chloe's fears subsided enough to let her out of the shower. The water that pooled beneath was tinged pink from the slight abrasions she'd made on her skin, having scrubbed hard enough to bleed. She once again stood in front of that god-awful mirror, expecting to see all of her fears confirmed, and to see not her face, but that of an emaciated corpse staring back. But of course, the only thing reflecting back to Chloe was her own perfect face. Feeling a little calmer, though, throughout the inspection in the mirror, Chloe tiptoed her way down the stairs and into the kitchen to clean up the sick she had left festering in the sink. All the while, her thoughts swirled around her, and the events of her life began to shuffle themselves to paint a new picture of what she remembered. Was it so bad to venture out into the world? People did so every day, and they were perfectly happy and healthy. Hell, even the few that did get sick were always cured and went on about life with not a care in the world. All the traumatic diseases she spent agonizing hours studying had always taken place in some remote area of the world where modern medicine was a fantasy too costly for everyone. Surely nothing truly grotesque could ever take over the delicate ecosystem of her body. Surely not. These thoughts continued to plague Chloe as the week passed and the crate remained broken. 4 days had passed since Chloe's fateful encounter with the homeless man, and the food was becoming sparse. Chloe had never bought more than she needed for a week at a time, since she always worried about having extra food that would harbor germs that could kill her. By this point, all she had left was a couple of eggs, a slice of bacon, and the ends of a loaf of bread. Hardly enough for one meal, let alone enough for 3 days. She briefly entertained the idea of ordering ahead of schedule, but quickly realized that she'd never called someone to come to repair the crate or any deliveries. Chloe sat in front of her computer, eyes glazed over as she blankly stared at the job board for her latest assignment. A low rumble erupted from her stomach, announcing the fact that she needed to eat. A quick call to the repairman proved to be fruitless, as someone wouldn't be available for another 2 days, and the thought of the delivery boy placing her groceries in the broken crate scared her far more than the possibility of catching malaria. Without seeing much of an option, Chloe got dressed to go do the one thing she hadn't done in 10 years. She was going to go out into the world and buy groceries herself. To say it was difficult to put her clothes on would have been an understatement, but even with very shaky hands, Chloe managed to make herself look somewhat presentable. She stalled for another hour after that, trying to build up the courage to open the front door. It took another 10 minutes of just standing with the door open before she took a step out into the world she hadn't seen in so very long. The sun shone down on Chloe, and a light breeze tossed her elegant curls as she took a deep breath in. Somewhere she could smell freshly cut grass and the faint scent of someone barbecuing. All at once, Chloe's senses were assaulted with new stimulus, and she couldn't move, stunned by all the sensations. It felt wonderful to Chloe. The world around her was truly beautiful, and the laughter of children was better than any song she'd ever heard. The quick walk to the grocery store also turned out to be a delight, as people drove by honking and waving as they passed. With each step she took, her fear lessened and lessened until the only thing she could feel was pure joy. Just as she imagined, the owners of the little grocery store were shocked to see their favorite customer walking in, timidly going through the aisles to find what she needed. They exchanged worried yet happy glances with each other as she shakily passed each item to them to be purchased. Chloe debated inwardly about giving them the hug she had fantasized about days before, but then thought better of it. Best not tempt fate, she figured, as there would always be next time. In fact, after the life-changing experience of going out into the world, Chloe intended to never shut herself in her home again. There was more she wanted to see, more she wanted to experience. The thoughts delighted her so much as she walked out of the grocery store that she never bothered to pay attention to the road before crossing it. She was so caught up in her daydream of visiting a park or going to a museum that she didn't hear the sudden shout from the shop owner as a car came barreling down the road straight at Chloe. And she was still caught up in the fantasy of a new world open to her as the car rammed right into her slight frame and sent her flying through the air. And poor Chloe, she never realized, as the life slowly left her body, that the things that she had always been so scared of in life were the least of her worries. She never realized that the only thing she really had to fear was her ineptitude in navigating herself in a world that didn't take in each and every small thing as though it were a gift given by God Himself. Tempting Fate by the Lizard Queen.
The Sisterhood. Today was the day. I had finally grown up. I followed the elders through the castle corridors towards the arena. This was where my fate would be decided. Everyone in my family has been involved in this, and most of the time we die because of it. to die of old age or through natural causes is considered the greatest of blessings. The walls were lined with paintings and statues of past soldiers. I could feel their eyes on me as I walked, silently judging me and what I would do. Their ghosts would watch from the paintings, forever silent. If I failed, it would be the end. The infamous red doors with gold markings were gradually becoming larger as I approached. Behind me I could hear my sister's footsteps, and my cousins, and my other distant family members beyond. All the girls of this generation. I wondered how many of us would survive. My palms were sweaty. Behind those doors I will be tested. I will become an adult in the community if I survive. We all stopped outside the door. The priests and priestesses of the order blessed us to give us victory, strength, and courage. Most of us will die here today. The doors creaked as it opened and we entered the arena of death. Our families will watch us fight and likely die. If they helped us, over 1,000 years of tradition would come to an end. The agreement would be broken and hell would be unleashed. It couldn't be easy to watch your children die. Behind me stood all the female children this generation. Unfortunately, many boys die in childhood. They send the demons to strike at them when they are young, and at their most vulnerable. No matter how many talismans were placed around the cribs, most of the boys of the clan die young. These makeshift gladiator games give people a chance to view the offspring of different clans. I suppose it's strange for you to hear about, but this is completely normal for us. As normal as allowing your child to get their own phone at a certain age or to go to the movies. Instead, we fight demons. My hand steadily held the hilt of my silver-plated sword. I dipped it in a mixture of salt and holy water. I looked around and saw the other young women of the family. Each of them were armed with their chosen weapon, one that we had all been training with since we were children. Nervously, we looked around and waited for the drawbridge to lower. It was one thing to be warned about this, to train, but it was another thing entirely to have a demon launch its attacks on you. The battle was bloody. Screams followed me as my sisters tore their own eyeballs out, while others desperately tried to run up the walls while screaming to their parents for help. All while their parents helplessly watched. Many others readied themselves and began to attack, weapons drawn. I saw one of my cousins cornered, and I cut the demon's head off, and I was sprayed in the face with oil like blood. It tasted utterly vile. I spat it out, but then we were separated. The air burned all around us as smoke was everywhere. It was hard to see and hard to breathe. We were warned in training about the chaos of battle and listening to tales from battle-hardened elders, but it was completely different to actually be there. I can't be sure, but I think 2 demons set my sisters against each other. There was just so much chaos. It was hard to see or hear anything. I felt teeth dig into my arm and I thrust my blade into its face. There was a scream and my arm was released, but something pounced on me and knocked me straight to the ground. The breath was taken right out of me. I looked up into the smoky mist and I saw the face. I will never forget those eyes. Its face was so close to mine. The smell of sulfur was incredible and overwhelming. I fought with it for a while, struggling, neither of us gaining the upper hand. Our mouths were open, and I managed to stab it in the temple. I will never forget that scream. I had a choking sensation, but eventually it passed. And finally, it came to the end. We won, but at a terrible cost. I stood up. My body ached and my sword was chipped. It was coated in slick, black blood and entrails. I looked down in awe at my trembling hands and stretched. I would have to get used to this. The sword felt hot and heavy as I dropped it to the ground. I survived. I can't believe I survived. I was the only one of 3 who did not perish in the onslaught of 70. 67 died this night. I walked out, but I was not alone. It was an incredible feeling to survive and to hear the clans cry out your name. Victory. The sense of victory. The look of happiness on my parents' face made it worthwhile. I exited the arena when the doors opened. The celebrations had already begun. Drinking, feasting, and the songs of heroism will be placed into legend. I saw my reflection in the glass I was drinking from, and there was a change in me. And not simply from the battle, but I picked up a visitor along the way.
And I'm happy to be free.
I was built to be loved, and to give love in return. That was the sole intention with which my creator made me, so when my new mother brought me home to meet my new sister, my heart leaped with excitement at the thought of finally fulfilling my life's purpose. "Jenny," said my new mother, "come here." I watched eagerly as my new sister bounded into the kitchen. This beautiful angel with gold hair and sparkling eyes was Jenny. I loved her the instant I saw her. It delighted me that she and I were almost the same size, though I was a little smaller. "What is it, Mom?" she asked. "I picked up something for you in town today," said our mother. She gleefully presented me to young Jenny. "What do you think?" Jenny's reaction was cooler than I'd hoped it would be. She stared at me for a moment and blinked. "It's a doll," she said. "Yes," our mother said. "Do you like it?" Jenny's lips curled into a smile, but the joy never quite reached her eyes. "Yes," she said. "She's beautiful. Thank you, Mommy." She took me in her arms, gave me a hug, and carried me off to the bedroom we would share. Maybe this will be fine after all, I thought to myself. Jenny placed me in a chair in the corner of our bedroom. I expected that I would sit here whenever she wasn't playing with me. And then, I thought, once bedtime came, we would surely snuggle together beneath the covers of the big bed on the other side of the room. This was not to be, however, as days went by, and Jenny never once took me from the chair. The most she would interact with me was to give me a suspicious glance from across the room. Sometimes this glance was accompanied by a shudder. That confirmed it. My new sister didn't like me. I was devastated. I decided I had to show her somehow that I was worthy of her affections. I needed her to know the love I was prepared to give her. So, one night, when the lights went out and I was sure Jenny was asleep, I channeled every bit of focus and energy I had into my limbs of fabric and stuffing. After what felt like hours, to my excitement, they finally began to move. Yes, I had learned to control them. Clumsily, as this was all still new, I got down from the chair and made my way toward Jenny's bed. I had no idea before I started that moving would take so much energy. I managed to get only halfway across the room before I could go no further. It was there that I dropped, forced to wait until morning. At last, the first rays of sunshine leaked into the room from beneath the window shade. Mother came to the door, as she always did. "Jenny, it's time to—" She stopped suddenly. "Jenny, what is your doll doing on the floor?"
"I don't know," Jenny said groggily. "I hadn't put it there."
"Nonsense, Jenny," Mother said. "You need to take better care of your things, young lady." But Before Jenny could protest any further, Mother cut her off. "Not another word, Jenny. Come downstairs and eat your breakfast." She closed the door, leaving us alone once more. Jenny got out of bed and slowly approached me where I lay. She moved with such trepidation, as if I were going to explode at any moment. At long last, she picked me up. It was the first time she had done so since that first day of my adoption, and the sensation was sweet. It was short-lived, however, as a moment later she placed me firmly back in the chair from which I'd come. She looked me over, not with suspicion this time, but with something like worry. Perhaps it was fear. "Jenny, hurry up," Mother called from downstairs. Jenny snapped to attention and obeyed, hurrying quickly from the room. I now understood, of course, that I was simply too weak or too new to walking to make the journey all the way across the room. The only thing to be done, I decided, was to practice. Each night, when I was sure Jenny had gone to bed, I would come down from my place and venture across the room. For the first few nights, whenever I felt my energy and strength leaving me, I would turn and try to get back to the chair with whatever I had left. Often, at first, I would simply collapse on the floor in front of or beneath the chair. In the mornings, when Jenny would discover me, I would be met with the same looks of confusion and concern. They never stopped feeling like rejection, but the pain I felt only made me more determined to show Jenny how worthy I was of her love. Just as I had hoped, moving became easier and easier. Within 2 months, I could make it all the way to Jenny's bed. The first time she discovered me there on the floor beside her bed in the morning, she screamed to my utter surprise. She didn't even pick me up and instead ran from the room. Moments later, she returned with Mother. "There!" Jenny said, pointing at me where I lay. "Jenny," said Mother, "don't be silly. Your doll just fell out of bed while you were sleeping." "But I didn't sleep with it," Jenny said. "I swear." Mother smiled sweetly. "Jenny, it's okay to sleep with your doll if you want to. You don't need to make things up." "But Now that's enough," Mother said. "Pick up your doll and come downstairs for breakfast." "I'm not touching her," Jenny snapped. "Jennifer," Mom said firmly, "stop acting up this instant. Pick up your doll right now." Jenny looked defeated. She hesitated and then slowly approached me. Mother watched as she slowly picked me up and placed me on the chair. "Thank you," she said. "Now come on before your pancakes get cold." I was left alone once again, stinging from the obvious dislike Jenny felt for me. I couldn't give up, though. I had to show her how loving and warm I could be, and I was very nearly there. The next night, I could barely contain my excitement. I felt good. I felt ready. Deep down, I knew I could do this. As had become my habit, I hopped down from my chair and made my way across the room. Only when I reached Jenny's bed did I begin to tire. I reached up, grabbed hold of the edge of Jenny's mattress, and hoisted myself up to where she slept. At last, I was beside her, my sweet sister. This was where I had longed to be. I sat for a long time, just watching Jenny sleep. She looked so peaceful, her little chest rising and falling. The slightest hint of a snore issued forth on every exhale. The love and emotion coursing through me almost made me shake. It's the one and only dream of every creature like me to be loved and cherished by a little girl like Jenny. It's what we were made to do. Without that, we are nothing. Now was my chance, I decided, to show Jenny how loving and comforting I could be. I inched slowly over to her face, the only part of her that lay exposed in a sea of blankets and pillows. I wrapped myself around her head in the tightest embrace I could manage. It felt wonderful to do so. I wish I could have spoken in that moment, because I would have shouted over and over again, "I love you, Jenny, I love you!" I felt her begin to stir beneath my grasp. Her movements became more and more erratic. A hand reached up from the blanket and tried to pull me away. The harder she pulled, the more steadfastly I held on. I had to show her that this was good. She needed to know that this was how things had to be. But still, she tried to free herself from my embrace. The grasping became clawing. She tried to sit up, but I wouldn't let her. Soon her actions began to slow. Her efforts became less and less urgent until, finally, all the tension seemed to leave her. This was what I had been dreaming of. She was no longer frightened of me. Acceptance at last. Mother knocked on the door the next morning as she normally did, but Jenny did not stir. This was highly unusual, and I became worried when time passed and my sister still hadn't moved. Mother came in, calling Jenny's name. Slowly, she approached the bed where we lay. I watched in confusion as Mother dropped to her knees. She let out a scream like no other I had ever heard. I knew something was wrong with Jenny. That was the last time I saw my beautiful sister. I miss her every single day, but it's not all bad. I live in Mother's room now. She talks to me fairly often. "You, my little darling," she says. "You were the last gift I ever gave her. Oh, she must have loved you dearly, but she was afraid to let me know. Big girls don't sleep with dolls, I suppose." She follows this with a small, half-hearted laugh, and then she begins crying once more, as has become her habit. Each night, however, she takes me to bed with her and holds me tight. I was built to be loved, and to give love in return. That was the sole intention with which my Creator made me. I wish I could have had that with Jenny for more than one night before she went away. However, it's clear that Mother needs me now, and I her, and together, we find love and comfort in each other.
Loneliness is Twin by the Lizard Queen. I've always been a bit of a loner. It was just easier that way. People and places so often disappoint, so I never saw the point of interacting with others, or leaving the comfort of my own home unless I absolutely had to. Hell, I even had my groceries delivered just to avoid prolonged interaction with people. I never really got into the hype of social media.
though I did have a Facebook profile after nonstop nagging from my sister. She thought it was important that I tried to talk to someone every once in a while, or to have at least some minor way for people to contact me. No one really understood why I liked being alone. In hindsight, maybe they all had the right idea. If I could go back in time, that's probably one thing I'd change about all this. Too bad there's no such thing as second chances. Maybe if I had paid attention to my sister, I wouldn't be stuck in the situation I'm in now. I'm not exactly sure how long I've been here. I'm pretty sure it's been a few days. I woke up in a room with no doors and no windows. It was white, a blinding, stark white that encompasses the entire space. The floor, the ceilings, the walls, everything was this piercing white that stung my eyes. It was hard to tell how big the room was when I first woke up. My first thought was, how the hell did I get here? Followed immediately by, where the hell is here? I had no real way of knowing. There wasn't a door that showed someone brought me here, and the memories of what I was doing before I woke up were missing. I was never one for panicking, though, and decided that my best course of action would be for me to figure out just how big the room really was, if I was indeed in a room. I mentally gauged how big a step I'd need to take to have each be a foot wide, and then began walking. 5 full steps forward, I hit a wall. Then I turned around and headed in the opposite direction. 10 steps total. I repeated the process again to get the rest of the dimensions, and learned I was in a perfect 10 by 10 room. Where the hell is the door? I said out loud to myself. The sound of my voice reverberated off of everything and bombarded my ears with a deafening echo. I covered my ears to try to block out as much of the sound as I could, but it seemed to go on forever. It was maddening, almost too much for my mind to take. Well, I guess it was too much because I had passed out. When I woke up again, I was still stuck in the same room. This was bizarre, to put it mildly. What was even stranger is that I should have begun to feel hungry, or at the very least thirsty. It had been hours since I'd last ate or drank anything. And who knows how long I had been here exactly in this room. But I wasn't hungry, and I wasn't thirsty. Am I dead? I thought to myself, knowing better than to give voice to my question. I certainly didn't feel dead. My head was killing me from the earlier noise, and the one spot between my shoulder blades that has always bothered me was doing its usual persistent nagging. You're not supposed to feel anything when you're dead, right? All right, so I'm not dead. If I'm not dead, maybe I'm dreaming. But that doesn't make sense either, because you can't feel pain in your dreams. Well, I've never felt pain in my dreams before, and I've had my fair share of nightmares. So, what is this place? There really wasn't much else to do but ponder these thoughts and pace around the room. I really don't know how long I paced for. If I had to guess, I'd say hours again, but time worked funny in this room of mine. I also never felt tired or sleepy, in addition to not being hungry or thirsty. I was definitely in some kind of conundrum. That's okay, I had thought to myself. I like being alone. I like living inside my own head. This won't be that big a deal. You say that now, but I imagine you'll start feeling differently very soon. A voice whispered to me from one of the corners of the room. What the hell? I said out loud and instantly regretted it. The sound was so much louder this time, a wailing of what the hell's bouncing off the walls. Only this time it didn't sound like my voice echoing. It sounded like whoever it was that spoke to me. Unfortunately, my mind couldn't handle the sound or the strangeness of the new situation, and I passed out again. I don't know how long time had passed before I woke up again. When I did, I was sitting in the middle of the room, and someone else was with me. Well, not someone else exactly. Right across from me was me, a perfect replica. Even the slight scar above my left eye from a soccer cleat accident. I don't care how strong your mental fortitude may be. Nothing can ever really prepare you for meeting yourself like that. Oh, you're finally awake. Hello. She sounded just like me, but didn't. It's hard to explain, but it was as if there was just one note in the cadence that was slightly off. Maybe not something someone else would have picked up, but I certainly could. What was interesting was that her voice didn't bounce off the walls like mine did. I just stared at her blankly, unsure what to do. I certainly didn't want to talk and have to deal with another blackout. She seemed to realize my hesitation, and her mouth moved to a wide, unnatural grin. It was terrifying to see that expression on her face. Just what the hell was going on, I kept thinking to myself. You can talk. It's okay. The noise won't bounce off the walls anymore. I took care of that. See? No echo. She said the last two words in a sing-song croon. This was the oddest conversation I had ever been in. Where are we? I asked quietly, not willing to test her confidence. Luckily, she was right. The sound didn't echo off the walls. She smiled that unnatural grin again and gave a light laugh that sent chills down my spine. Oh, here. She waved her finger around to represent the room we were in. Well, no shit, Sherlock. But where's here? My tone instantly snide. I shouldn't have been so rude to my twin, but I never had much experience in talking with other people, much less someone who was me but not me. She laughed again and got up without answering. I noticed that she was wearing what looked like a cosplayer's version of a straitjacket, but made up as a dress instead of the arms being wrapped tightly around the body. Her legs were covered in black nylons that rips and snags all over the place. She looked cool, if I was to be honest with myself, and pulled off the look very well. She did an unbalanced pirouette, making the arms of the jacket flap around her like wings. We're here, Sophie, you silly girl. This is my room. This is your perfect hiding place, she said in that sing-song voice. She said it in a matter-of-fact way, as though I knew exactly what place she was talking about. But even in my most vivid daydream, I had never come up with a place like this white room. This place is where your mind likes to hide whenever you have to do something you don't like. What? I've never been here, even in my mind. I'd rather be somewhere like Azeroth or fighting the Covenant if I was trying to get away from something I didn't like, even in my mind. She smiled again and nimbly knelt down in front of me. Oh, you silly rabbit. Always lying to yourself. That's okay, you'll realize soon enough. She got back up and began spinning around the room once again. You have no idea how long I've wanted us to be here together, though. It's awfully lonely being stuck in here by myself, and you won't let me out to play very much. She stopped spinning and cocked her hip while wagging a finger at me. Do you know how rude that is? You used to play with me all the time. Why won't you let me play with you anymore? She didn't let me answer before she went back to her spinning. I hadn't the faintest idea what she was talking about, though. I've always been an imaginative individual, but I've never thought of anything like this before. I shook my head and got up, having grown tired of sitting on the floor. By this point, me but wasn't me had begun playing a game of hopscotch, giggling with each step she took. I'm sorry, I had no idea. I don't remember you. Could you tell me who you are? I asked her in as calm a voice as I could muster. I'm Sophie. You're Sophie. We're Sophie. Right. Could you tell me how that works? I'm a little confused by all this. I looked around the room with a solemn look on my face. I felt incredibly silly doing all this, but she seemed to be the only way to get out of this room I found myself trapped in. Huh. She huffed in annoyance at the question and stopped her game. Ugh, honestly, you've never had to ask before. She huffed again and plopped herself down on the ground, patting the area in front of her. I walked over cautiously, afraid of what she would do if I got too close. Carefully sat in front of her, poised to stand up at any moment she moved. She huffed again and said, I'm you. I'm the part of you you let have all the fun. I'm the one that handles the stuff you don't want to handle. Remember that time in Miss Craig's class when Andy called you ugly and everyone laughed at you? I did remember that. I had to start wearing glasses the day before, and my parents couldn't afford nicer frames. I was 8, and the kids were so cruel, Andy in particular. He had called me ugly and said I should never come back to school because no one wants to be friends with an ugly kid with bug-eyed glasses. A tear welled up in my eye and slowly fell down my cheek. It had been so long since I thought about him or anyone else I had gone to school with. Sophie nodded at my realization and continued. How about when Jacob asked you to the spring formal, but it turned out to be a joke, and when you showed up at the dance, he was there with Cindy. She said that no one would want to go to the dance with the school's biggest loser. I remember that too. I ran out of the gym in my heels and hid behind the music building until it was time for my mom to pick me up. I didn't want her to know I was invited as a cruel joke. She'd been so happy for me and spent money we didn't have to get a dress. He died that night, I remember. They said it was a car accident, I said in a small voice. All these memories of bad experiences began dancing around my mind, just like she had around the room, each one coming closer and slicing a little piece of me. It was agony. I hated remembering these things. Oh, it was no accident, Sophie, she said once again, using that sing-song voice. That was me. He really shouldn't have done what he did to us. That was just rude. How could that have been you? There's no way. You're a figment of my imagination. She frowned at that and got angry. How could you say that? How dare you? I've been the one to protect us every single fucking time someone does something to you. Remember what happened to Cindy? She killed herself that night. I did that. And what about that bitch Tamra, your old boss at the computer store? She got on our ass every single day for no other fucking reason than because she felt like it. And what happened to her? Died during a robbery gone wrong. I did that too. All I've ever done my entire life was protect you. And I'm tired of it. I shook my head violently. There's no way. All these things had been accidents, incidents of circumstance. How could she possibly have done this? Unless she's saying, I did it? Oh my God. Did I do this? Did I black out during those times and do those things? I grabbed the side of my head and rocked back and forth. This isn't possible. There's no way this was possible. She made a loud sound and barked a short laugh. No, are you kidding me? How stupid can you be? I'm not some kind of split personality. You're not insane. She cocked her hip again. Frankly, I'm insulted. There's no way in hell you wouldn't have gotten caught if it had been some kind of split personality thing, because you would still leave evidence. She was right. It didn't make sense that this was some kind of freaky conversation with another personality inside me. She was right in that if I had done those things unknowingly, there would have been some evidence to trace back to me. I stopped rocking and looked up at her. Then what are you? Please tell me. Please, I pleaded. This time, she looked sad when she knelt down in front of me. I'm you. Remember? Everyone has a double. Everyone. I was conceived the moment you were. I was living beside you inside Mom's womb. But me, and the ones like me, we aren't the ones meant to live like you do. We're just watchers. We live through your actions. She looked down at our knees as she said this, as though she was regretting what she was saying. I wasn't supposed to do those things. I was just supposed to watch. But we didn't deserve that life. I didn't deserve that life. I'm not some loser, and I'm tired of us living alone, being alone all the damn time. I want to play. I want to have fun. You don't deserve to be the physical one. I do. There's no way to switch our roles. Believe me, I've tried. At that, she got up again and began pacing around the room. My world, however, was crashing down around me. My entire life was being rewritten as I looked at past events and realized that there was a shadow of me in every single one. The imaginary friend I had had when I was 3 that looked like me and talked like me, even had my name, was her. She had been there the entire time, living life through my eyes. I could feel her frustration over the life I had chosen for us. This was too much. Just too much for me to handle. No, I broke into a kneeing sob. I'm so sorry. So sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Life's just too hard. It's too hard. I know. You're not strong enough, Sophie. But I am, she said matter-of-factly. So what do we do? She smiled, that Cheshire cat smile again. I'm so glad you asked.
It comes from the walls. I was 8 when my brother Josh died. I remember it vividly, even now. Every little detail, from when I woke up until his very last breath. He was 2 years older than me, and we would fight non-stop, like most siblings do. That day was no different. We got up early before our parents did, and raced down the stairs. He won. He always did. And was able to snatch what little was left of the cereal box. I was so mad at him for that. After we had finished breakfast, we ran outside to play. It was a warm summer morning, and I can still image the wall of the heat hitting me as I opened the front door. We played for hours without pause, and remained one of the best memories I have of him. He died around noon. A long drop, a crunch, and a snap. It all happened so fast. I just stood there, frozen, watching as the pond of blood grew, and listening intently at his final wheezing breath left in his broken body. Shock, my parents said. I was in shock. They couldn't get me to speak for weeks. I observed when the ambulance arrived, the paramedics and the firemen running around shouting hysterically, and the sirens dying out in the distance. My mom and dad left, sobbing inconsolably. I stood silent as the funeral came. I held my breath as I lowered the coffin into the awaiting depths, and only after I saw the headstone loom before me could I allow myself to talk again. We moved shortly after the funeral. Mom could no longer stand living in this house. My dad reluctantly agreed, but kept telling her that they would be losing money on sale. Mom didn't care. No amount of money could have persuaded her to stay, to live on the property that stole Josh from her. I knew then that nothing would ever be the same again. The new house was quite a bit smaller than the older one, but I liked it. It was cozy and sweet, and had sort of an old cottage vibe to it. Even though I missed Josh, I was happy to have a bedroom to call my own, to decorate it as my own, to grow up in it. Days, weeks, months passed, and not much changed. There was an aura of gloom around the family, a lingering grief that wouldn't quite let go. It was like the days just faded into nothing, like none of us really were there. Originally, I thought that was the reason it came. It was drawn to our grief, to our constant ever-present sorrow. The first time it came from the walls was 3 months after Josh's death. It was a day like all the others, grey and eventful, and I had drifted off to sleep later than usual. My body may be somehow aware that there was something unnatural nearby. I awoke in the darkness by an unidentifiable sound, somehow coming from all the walls at once. It was sort of a soft clicking sound, rising in pitch, then lowering again. I had never heard anything quite like it. I sat up in bed, squinting, trying to make out where it could originate from. After a few minutes, my eyes were slowly adjusting to the darkness, and my gaze was drawn to a hole in the wall. It was just a tiny knothole, maybe an inch or two, but for some reason I was convinced it was the source of the sound. I sat there for a few minutes, trembling, just staring into the hole, not knowing why. Then I noticed it started widening, yet inexplainably remaining the same size. I crept under my sheets in fear when the head squeezed through. I just lay there, frozen, unable to move or make a sound. I could hear it moving around there, like it was exploring, searching. I must have stayed under the sheets for hours before I finally passed out. The next morning, I jolted awake with a scream, and immediately ran to tell my parents about it. They dismissed it, of course, Just some vivid dream caused by the overactive imagination, they were sure. I tried to reason with them, but soon gave up. They just wouldn't listen. This kept happening for weeks. I would wake up to the soft clicking sound, stare at the hole, and hide under my sheets when I saw the head emerge. I could never get a good look of it. I was far too frightened, but it was completely bald, and the skin had an Asian grey complexion to it. I could just really judge the dimensions of it because of the impossible nature of its arrival. I would plead to my parents to just believe me, or let me sleep with them, or simply just explore the knothole, tear down the walls. But they would just dismiss me every time, usually telling me I was being childish, that it was just a nightmare, and it would eventually stop. One night, I decided I wasn't going to hide anymore. I was going to face the thing that came from the walls, figure out what it wanted. I was terrified, but resolute. I woke up like all the other nights, listening intently to the eerie clicking sound, staring at the knothole with absolute concentration, swallowing deeply as the hole started to widen, and choking back my fear when the appealing head squeezed through and landed on the ground with a thump, and I stared in horror as a tiny, underdeveloped body writhed on the floor, struggling with the weight of its oversized head. I let out a scream then. I just couldn't hold it anymore. The creature raised his head strenuously, like an alerted animal, and stared directly at me. There was holes. Nothing but holes. The mouth was a yawning chasm of nothing. The nose and eyes were just the same. Just endless abyssal rifts. I screamed again, this time probably loud enough to wake up the entire neighborhood. My mom says she still has nightmares about that scream, and she will easily admit it froze her blood to ice. My parents came running into the room in a hysterical frenzy, only to find me alone, curled up on the floor in fetus position, screaming my lungs out. It took them hours to calm me down, and they said I only spoke nonsensical gibberish. They took me to my aunt's for a few days, but eventually I was forced to sleep in my own room again. The ritual continued. I woke up, stared at the hole until the head emerged, then hid under my sheets for the remainder of the conscious night. I was slowly but surely getting used to it. I still told my parents about it, but they still wouldn't believe me. I know it sounds horrible, but you have to understand, they were still dealing with the death of Josh. They simply had no energy to indulge my self-inducing traumas. But at some point, I got used to it too. But at some point, I got too used to it. I simply stopped waking up. The sound no longer bothered me, and I would just sleep through it. Problem solved, right? I certainly thought so. Until I woke up one night with the thing on top of me, staring right in my face. Those endless, abyssal eyes swirling away. That gaping chasm of a mouth hovering inches above me. I was too mortified to scream, my body now somehow unable to move at all. As an adult, I could have simply written it off to some extreme form of sleep paralysis, if it wasn't for the next part. Full smelling black liquid started pouring from the creature's orifices, completely covering, drowning my face in it. My mouth was filling with the awfulness of it, and at the same point I swallowed some, just to catch my breath. The taste was that of death, of decay and rot. I was panicking, desperately trying to move, scream, do anything at all. But I couldn't. I was trapped. And sooner or later, I just passed out. I woke up in a pond of black liquid. I showed my parents the full stuff and explained what had happened. My dad said he had seen some of the leakage around the house, so it must have been of that. Just some still, purged water seeping through the roof. I resigned them from even asking them anything again. They simply couldn't be trusted. We moved a couple of years later. I would see the creature every night, but I made sure to set an alarm so that I never had to wake up to the horrible creature's face ever again. But now I was free. I thought happily. We were getting along better as a family, and we were finally moving away from that cursed place. And for months I felt wonderful. I had a semblance of life again, of freedom, of joy. But then, one night, I woke up to the soft sound of clicking. I sat up and scanned the walls, and there it was, a tiny knothole, and a head squeezing through it. Moving didn't help at all. The creature followed me. Wherever I went, I'd be free for a couple of months, tops. Then I would wake up to that sound, and that head. Every once in a while, I would slip through it, and wake up with the ashen grey face inches from my own. Liquid would pour, and I would swallow it. Then I'd wake up in a pond, with no one there to believe me. I grew up depressed, stressed, unhinged, half mad. Somehow, I made it through school, college, and even got a job. But it would never feel good. I could never feel joy. I could never connect with another human being ever again. The creature wouldn't let me. It slowly drained the life from me. When I was 25, my doctor told me that my psychological age was that of a 5-year-old. Smart exercising, he said. One day, 3 years ago, I went back to the place where it all started. I had known for years already, maybe even always, what caused it, what brought it to me, what it was, but I could never take it in, even admit to it, never confess, and that was always the reason for my punishment. I stood by the gaping chasm of the abandoned dried up well, where Josh had fallen in, staring into the depths. I remembered every moment of the day, every detail vividly. I remember playing hide and seek. I remember hiding behind the garage. I remember seeing Josh looking for me around the well. He stood so close, so dangerously close. Then I remembered how mad I was at him for eating the last of the cereal, and I remember creeping up behind him and pushing him with all my might. Then an endlessly long drop, a loud crunch, a blood-curdling snap. "I'm sorry, Josh," I then said. "I didn't mean to do it. I thought it was just water." But his vengeance is endless. Endless like that drop. Endless like the black of the creature's eyes. Endless like my suffering. I will go to sleep tonight. Every night. Forever. And it will come from the walls.
Do it. Do it. Do it. Do it. Do it. The persistent feminine voice continued with its usual chant. Kelly sighed inwardly and ignored the voice as much as she could. She hated when they all started talking, especially all at once. But at least the feminine voice wasn't as grating. "She won't do it. She's a chicken shit," came the masculine voice with its awful hiss. "Shut up, all of you," Kelly thought to them, and tried her best to finish her work. Overhead, the lights remained off, letting her know that none of her patients needed her. Next to her, another nurse quietly dozed in her chair, and the act looked mighty good to Kelly, too. Can't have us both falling asleep, though, can we? She mused. They were both in the ICU ward of Sacred Dynasty Hospital, where the sickest of patients resided. She had been working this job for the last 7 years, and each year the voices demanded another lamb sacrifice. Ugh, I really hate this time of year, she thought to herself as she absurdly ticketed off items on her checklist. No, you don't, Kelly. You love doing it. Every single time. You just don't want to admit it to yourself, the feminine voice insisted. Kelly shrugged, silently agreeing with it. It was true. She did enjoy the quiet ritual she's played out every year on this day. Sometimes she was working that night, which meant the sacrifice had to come from her place of work. That meant she needed to set herself up to be in the best position for that. At the time, she figured nursing would be the most viable option. It turned out to be a fruitful endeavor. She actually enjoyed the work, felt a sort of elation each time she helped save a life, even in a minute way. Yet she knew that none of that really compared to her taking a life. The hunt, the thrill of seeking the spark of life disappear within a person was the greatest aphrodisiac of all. She always felt incredibly sexual afterwards, and her husband well appreciated it every time. She still felt those prickles of shame each time she did it, though, even if it was just once a year, and she had standards. She promised herself never to kill a child, no matter how enfeebled. She also promised herself never to go after a healthy one again. Not after that one debacle when she was 17 and hunted her first lamb. But she had to admit to herself that things did get boring killing the same deathly old people year after year. You should get Mickey this time, Kelly. Come on, you like it, and stop feeling so bored. Who cares if he's only 7? The masculine voice nagged. Fuck off and shut up, Kelly said out loud, startling her colleague. What? She said groggily and rubbed her eyes. Oh, sorry, Nadine. I was just talking to myself. I'm gonna go get started on my rounds. Kelly groaned softly as she got out of the old office chair and made her way to Mickey's room. She had no intention of doing what the damn voice wanted, but needed to check his vitals. He looked okay, despite being connected to a bunch of tubes. He was sleeping peacefully on his pillow, taking shallow breaths as he dreamt about whatever it was little 7-year-olds dream about. Come on, Kelly, just do it already. It's getting late. Another voice whispered in her mind. This one was different, though. Always more urgent and insistent. Kelly sighed again and played out the same argument she had each year. No, I already told you guys, I'm not going to kill a kid. There's plenty of others here tonight I could get. Just be patient for fucking once, alright? All the voices, 15 in total, started chattering, loud wailing of complaints. She had no real idea why they wanted a child so damn badly, but Kelly wasn't planning on giving in. This kid was pretty far gone, but not beyond any help, and he had been showing signs of improvement over the last couple of days. It'd be suspicious if he was to suddenly die, and suspicion was not something she needed. After the quick assessment, Kelly moved on to Myrtle's room. Myrtle was a perfect candidate for the ritual tonight, and the voices knew it. Old, no hope of getting better, and, best of all, no family to question her sudden demise. A smile began to form on Kelly's lips as the anticipation of the hunt became palpable. Her heart raced, and beads of sweat formed at the small of her back. It was always like this when it came time for the ritual to start. She used to always feel so ashamed feeling this way. but had learned to savor the moment just as much as the voices did. The voices had realized things were about to take off and quickly quieted their chatter. Myrtle, as usual, was awake. She had been suffering from insomnia from the latest round of medication her doctor prescribed. She gave a wet, hacking cough to acknowledge Kelly's entrance into her room and put the TV on mute. Her skin had the mottled look of someone whose kidneys were failing and a look of unadulterated hatred in her eyes. This was not all that unusual for Myrtle, though. She had disliked all of the nursing staff, Kelly in particular, and often screamed that they were trying to kill her. They had to give her sedatives regularly to keep her from attacking the wayward nurse, who was just trying to help her. With Kelly, however, she never struggled, never fought. There was a keenness about her, a subtle knowing of who and what Kelly was. This night was no exception. "Is tonight the night you finally kill me, Nurse Kelly?" she croaked, her voice laced with venom. Kelly smiled slightly and didn't respond. The ritual had begun after all, and there weren't any words that could be said that would stop what she came in to do. Kelly studiously checked Myrtle's vitals and leads as she began to say the beginning invocation to herself. "On this night I give to thee a new soul most willingly. From centuries gone and futures met, I say these words the setting set." Myrtle began to cough more aggressively, and her eyes glazed over as the invocation started to hook itself into her psyche. She whimpered, a sad sound coming from an animal caught in a trap. "Through time and space, old and new, take this gift I give to you. Take this gift I give to you." Kelly began to hum a lullaby her mom used to sing during long nights of nightmares and monsters. The soft melody seemed to calm both people caught up in the ritual, and the voices howled in triumph as the light slowly faded behind Myrtle's eyes. With a smile, the ritual had been completed, and she was gone. Quickly, the machines went off all at once, a mechanical symphony heralding the passing of Myrtle Black. People rushed in as Kelly moved to revive Myrtle from the grips of death, not knowing that she had been the harbinger of it. "Another successful night," the feminine voice said, satisfaction flavoring the words. A few of the others grumbled over their disappointment of Kelly's choice, but said nothing else otherwise. A doctor. Kelly forgot his name in her quiet throes of triumph, shoved her roughly aside as he began performing CPR on the dead old woman. Frustration and anger came across Kelly in a wave of intense heat as she was disregarded by everyone else in the room. How dare they interrupt her inner celebration, she thought. As the anger coursed through her body, the voices echoed her anger, screaming at her to take his life as well. She gasped softly at the thought. The ritual had never been done more than once in a night, or even more than once in a year. But this sudden desire, need, to extinguish the soul within the uncouth man burned inside her, cold yet hot at the same time. Without consciously knowing it, Kelly began to recite the ritual's invocation in her mind again. A flash of blinding light erupted around the room as lightning sizzled out of Kelly and straight into the doctor. There were screams from all corners, but she heard nothing as the man's soul was violently ripped out of his body, leaving a dried-up husk of a body on the floor. People screamed louder at the sight of a once able-bodied man in his early 40s sprawled on the room's floor. His eyes were open, full of terror, and his mouth was frozen in a silent scream that never escaped his lips. Kelly stood there, shocked at what had just happened. The voices, gleefully cheering as a new presence slowly took shape within her mind. A man's voice.
rough, sullen spoke. "Where the hell am I? What is this?" Kelly's hands moved to her mouth as she realized what she had done. Dr. Smith was now the newest resident in her mind. "Don't worry, Kevin. You'll like it here," the masculine voice crooned. A shrill, panicked scream reverberated in Kelly's mind as Dr. Smith realized what his fate would now be. "You fucking bitch. You killed me? How?" Kelly didn't really have an answer. She sighed loudly and simply said, "Fuck. Not another one." As more people rushed into the small ICU room to assess what had just occurred.
We call them peelers. Some of them are return customers, while others only come in the one time and leave in tears, streaking blood across the diner floor. What they do is called peeling, and it's the new dumb fad kids are into nowadays. I'd rather see them choke on snorted condoms than peeling in our bathroom stalls, because at least the condoms don't make a bloody mess. From what I hear, peeling isn't really a self-harm kind of thing like cutting is. It's more of a rite of passage, the way some kids challenge each other to see who can hold their palm over an open flame the longest. In the case of peeling, instead of a flame, they use a potato peeler and see who can peel off the longest chunk of skin in a single curl. The whole thing is so dumb on so many levels. I can usually tell when a group is about to do it. They shoot each other this conspiratorial look over the tops of the menu they hide behind, and one by one sneak into the bathroom when they think no one's looking. It's usually guys, but some girls do it too. I try to stop them when I can, but I'm not a babysitter, and I've got paying customers to serve, so I can't always get involved in their dumb dick measuring contest. I was concerned back when they first started peeling a few weeks ago, but I quickly realized most kids can't handle the pain. They usually only manage to cut a small sliver, about the size you'd scrape off by accidentally slashing yourself with your thumbnail. But I've seen a guy run out of the bathroom with blood-soaked napkins from his wrist to halfway up his forearm. I guess some people handle the pain better than others. The manager joked about putting up a "no skin, no service" sign in the window, but that'd be about as good as a deterrent as candy wrappers on a dick. I thought I'd become desensitized to the whole thing, more annoyed than concerned, but last night the sick practice was taken to a whole other level. If I seem nonchalant now, it's not because I'm desensitized. It's because I'm probably still in shock. It had been a busy night at the diner, and as a result, I'd not been as vigilant as I could have been. I was running from table to table, dealing with drunks and kids from the high school across the street, coming in for a post-end-of-year dance snack. It felt like half the student body came through our door that night, and by closing time, I was so exhausted and eager to get home, I forgot to lock the door before I flipped the open sign over to the closed side. I was in the back sweeping the floor when I heard the chime of the bell above the door. By the time I got to the front of the diner, there was no one there. I figured whoever had opened the door saw the place was empty and the lights were dimmed, and so they'd walked back out in search of a fast food place. It never occurred to me to check the bathrooms. I locked the front door and went back to sweeping, telling the chef it was nothing. I'd earned the least amount of tips that night, short by a mere $1.50, so it was my job to clean the washrooms while the other waitresses left out the back door. The manager was in his office, looking over inventory or something and waiting for me to finish up so he could lock up. No greater motivator to go fast than to know your boss is waiting on you. I cleaned the girls' washroom in no time, and then hauled a large box of cleaning supplies into the boys' much dirtier washroom. The first thing I noticed was the potato peeler sitting in the urinal farthest from the door. Someone's mom was going to be very upset they'd lost it, I thought. On the other hand, it had probably been peed on all night, probably used as target practice, so it was best it never be used for food ever again. I scooped it up with a wad of paper towels and tossed it in the bin. That's when I noticed the brown leather belt peeking out from under the stall. Great, I thought. Look, if you're going to have sex in a diner bathroom, at least have the decency to grab your clothes on the way out. You have no idea how many socks and panties we have to throw away in a month. It's a lot. I wadded up paper towels again, because my hands are never touching anything that's been on the floor of that bathroom, and then reached down to take it. Is there even a way to describe what it felt like to lift it? It had the color and size of a belt, it was as heavy as one, but it didn't have the right thickness or rigidness. It was like grabbing an unspooled fruit by the foot, only it was warm and wet and made a slippery noise as I pulled it from the ground, like the sound of stepping off a fresh dirt on a blistering summer day. I dropped it and it went limp on the ground, splattering a light dusting of blood on the tiles and over my feet. It was automatic. I dropped something, so my instinct was to pick it up and not drop it again. I bent over and grabbed the feeble belt, and as I did, I saw it stretched all the way into the stall and coiled around in a messy spiral much, much larger than any belt. It was more like a stringy blanket. Part of me knew and understood what I was seeing, but as I pushed open the stall door, my lizard brain kicked in and poured a thick syrup of numb disbelief over my mind. I started to pull at the string of skin, unspooling it with ease. I lost the paper towel somewhere along the way, flesh touching wet, slippery flesh as I unraveled the blanket. A single continuous string, like flawlessly peeling a potato in one shot. I didn't even feel sick. I just acted. I just cleaned because that's what I was in the bathroom for. I put this massive mound of skin in a garbage bag and, staring blankly, exited the bathroom with the intention of tossing it in the bin outside. But then I noticed the streaks of blood on the floor I hadn't seen earlier, because the box of cleaning supplies had been blocking the view. Still in shock, I dropped the bag of skin and followed the streaks of blood by gaze all the way down to a booth by the window. In the dim light, I could see a silhouette staring back at me. A puddle was forming beneath him. He peeked out from the side of the booth, and I thank my lucky stars the lights were too low to properly see his face, though my mind constructed the image regardless, based on memories from anatomy class. His movements were lethargic, and he sluggishly raised a hand and snapped his fingers, or he tried to. The sound wasn't a snap, but a sloshing of liquidy sinew against liquidy sinew. He spoke weakly. "Menu, please." I backed away, slowly inching my way to the manager's office. I heard the splatters of children's wet feet running by the pool coming from the sitting area as I breached the threshold to his office. I mumbled something about calling the cops, but I don't think my words made sense. The blood on my uniform spoke on my behalf, and the boss quickly shut and locked the door behind me. We waited in the office for 10 long minutes. Him trying to get more information, me barely able to string a single coherent sentence together. When the cops finally showed up, the skinless man was gone, leaving a trail of blood all the way to the back door. At least, he had the courtesy of taking his skin with him.